Now it's been a good couple of months since this happened. I live in a quiet village in the south of Germany next to our village, where you can find a rather large forest with lots of hiking and biking tracks leading through it. When I was little, either my aunt or dad took me through the woods for a walk every second day virtually. It basically became a habit for me. Now, I usually went on walks with music during the daytime, but one night during the full moon and clear sky, I felt a little brave and bored at the same time and decided to go for a stroll. I grabbed my flashlight just in case, and my phone before I headed out. Halfway there though, on my usual walk, I come across a little bridge that led to the forest. One of my favourite songs actually faded out before the next one could play, and I heard the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard in my life. It actually forces me to take off my headphones, thinking that maybe a boar or something is stepping through towards me. And I'm pretty terrified. I now turn on my flashlight trying to figure out what's happening, and I see something among the trees next to an entry path, a snow white, skinny as hell, pitch black-eyed thing staring at me. I've never felt this horrified in my life before. My insides told me that if I took another step, I'd pass away. I didn't care for what was happening as I turned around and ran for my life home, consistently having the feeling of being chased. Ever since that, when I'm home alone, I feel like I'm being watched and really uneasy. On several occasions, I've actually heard footsteps outside on our porch and garden chairs being pushed around. I have no idea what I've seen or what to think about it. If anybody had any explanation for this, I'd really be grateful. So me and two of my friends decide to go to Tunnel 2, which is like the shortest walk, but that is because you have to park in the middle of literally nowhere and walk through a pretty dense wood line. So we get out of the car, start to walk up the path to the tunnel, and my friend, we'll call him N, has this huge and high-powered spotlight which we were using because it's much better than my little tack flashlight. N's spotlight can reach really far, like half a mile, so I decided to flash it back and towards my friend's car. I then see two eyes in the woodline behind the car, like halfway up this tree. My friend's like, whoa, that's pretty high up. We're like, yeah, let's go and check that out. We don't see the eyes, so we assume it's an animal or something that had ran off. My friend has the light and says, hey, it's over there. It's coming closer now. Now, it was 100% humanoid with its head. Then we see the arms. At this point, we get sketched out and say, let's go back to the car. We're about 100 yards from the car now. We get to the break of the dense woodline and are probably 75 meters from the car, and I see the eyes again with this flashlight, and they're even closer now. At this point, we've got our knives ready, we're really scared. R then goes, we gotta get to the car, but it's right over there on the other side of the road. We get to the metal rebar blockade type thing that blocks the path so no cars can drive through, and we don't see the eyes. We stop and we start scanning the wood line on the other side of the road, and I see to our left an eye peeking at us as it darts back behind the tree. It now re-peaks and I see 100% a humanoid head and arm as it darts behind another tree. At this point we book it to the car. We get in the car and then winds down the back window and start scanning with the light. We see it 20 yards from the car with its head and its arm and its foot wrapping around a tree again. R is in basically full panic now as it keeps getting closer, so he floors it. N vouches it was like Bigfoot. R to this day says that he has no idea what it could have been and doesn't want to think about it. Honestly, I want to say Bigfoot, but I'm skeptical, but I genuinely don't know. It was 7 to 8 feet tall and kept getting closer to us, and it wasn't an owl and it wasn't a bear. And it was not a human because human eyes don't refract light in the same way that this thing was. N refuses to go back to the tunnel, he's that scared. It's probably one of the most terrifying moments in my life. The thing is that It wasn't even that scary, but we're so scared on the way home and have this horrible feeling of dread and terror, even as we pull up to the trail. Now, we've all agreed that it's the strangest feeling of our entire lives, like an immediate, insurmountable dread that night as we get out of there in the car. I still have no idea what it could have been even now. Now this happened in the mid-90s, about 20 to 50 miles east of Sweet Home in Oregon. Now I was a child of about 10 years when this encounter occurred. I'd forgotten about it until recently. A dream sparked my memory. I was camping with my family in the mountains outside of Sweet Home. I was doing what all children do when camping and exploring the area, generally following the nearby river, when I come upon a section of the river with two steep banks separated by a ravine cut by the river. I vaguely remembered looking across to the opposite side of the river and saw a couple of small, pale, emaciated looking people with pointy ears climbing up the steep embankment on all fours, and I remembered wanting to jump across to try and get a better look, but being really creeped out at the same time. The whole experience was really surreal. Even now it's a hazy memory. I don't remember them wearing any kinds of clothes, but they may have been wearing loincloths. I didn't see their faces because I only noticed them as they're moving away from me and facing away from me. No hair or fur whatsoever. Reminds me of the movie Monsters in Descent. I had the strangest experience a few weeks back at my local 7-Eleven early in the morning. I and my fiance are both in our car heading to a 7-Eleven to get the usual prerequisites that the morning requires: caffeine, donuts, etc. We pulled into the parking lot and park in front of the store, and we're about to get out and we look at the car next to us. The driver is normal enough. Your average looking 20-something Caucasian female, but sitting next to her was something really odd. A male, Caucasian, glasses on, looking for the most part towards everyone, except for one major difference. He had short, goat-like horns coming out of his head, and they were grey and fat at the base and got thinner as they got up higher, like maybe a baby goat or just nubs. Now, we quickly turn our heads to verify that we've both seen the same thing. A moment later, and instead of a horned man sitting next to us is a large collie dog mix. Now, the woman driving, mind you, seems oblivious to all of this and is doing her makeup in the mirror. Baffled, we simply pull back out and go home and take the next day off work. We spend the day napping, and in between the naps, I'm very tired and try and figure out what I've seen. Now, it's in the middle of Kansas City in a busy parking lot, and it was really odd to have seen that, but nobody else seemed to have picked up on it. If it was just myself, I'd think maybe it was me, but I'm not sure. So this happened in about 1990 in southeast Michigan. Twice I saw a tall, black humanoid-shaped figure that ran like the wind and appeared to almost fly across the ground. Both times it was dark out, and both times it scared the heck out of me and my friends I was with. I was with different friends. One at the first sighting and another at the second, but they both saw it too. Back up about 4 years ago before I saw the creature, a friend of mine was riding a mini bike. My brother and I were getting cryptic phone calls from someone our age who wouldn't tell us his name. I can't remember what the talk was about, but it was really creepy. Then one day, I hung up the phone and my brother says, "Who was it?" I told him he wouldn't say. Now my brother guessed it was someone who passed away. Then in 2002, I go to see the movie and I get big chills. Nothing bad really ever happened to me, my friends, or that town. Besides that, we experienced the same thing at West Virginia, just like in the movie. Anybody else had anything similar happening? When I was about 7, I wasn't sure exactly how it happened, but I fell asleep on the couch, which was next to the window, looking into the front yard. This happened 3 nights in a row. I looked out of the window and saw something peeking out from behind one of the trees. It stood about 8 feet tall or so. I could somewhat make out the features because of the streetlight. It had red glowing eyes, wings that came to a point, and honestly looked scary. Well, I thought about it until I was about 23. Then I had the exact same dream one night, but I was in my 23-year-old's body. I saw my younger self sleeping and my dad sleeping on the other end of the couch. The trailer was exactly the same, which is odd because I didn't remember it until this dream. I couldn't move, but I could crouch down. I looked out the window and saw it staring at me once more. Now this happened a few years ago, and I'll recount it as accurately as I can. So a few years ago, myself and my bandmates played a show in northeastern Kansas. If you're familiar with the area, you might be aware of a certain purple-coloured cat mascot in the college town that we played. We drove back to our homes in Kansas City and chose to take the back roads and state highways instead of travelling further south to the interstate highway. As we're driving in a relatively remote area of northeast Kansas, we were driving along a cornfield which took up the entire left side of the highway for several miles. I was driving, my bassist was in the passenger seat, and our singer was in the back seat distracted by the phone. As we're driving, my bassist and I suddenly see something sitting on the cornfield to our left, a huge figure, at least 7 or 8 feet tall, suddenly darting into the cornfield on the left, just as my headlight revealed it. If you've seen the movie Signs, then you're familiar with the scene where he shines his flashlight and briefly sees the leg of an alien creature suddenly retreating into the cornfield. It was honestly exactly like that. Now turning as if it just realised that we've noticed it. The figure, as far as I remember, stood 7 to 8 feet tall, and from the brief glimpse we caught of it, appears to be covered in feathers and is owl-like. I distinctly remember myself and the bassist swearing, saying, "Did you see that?" We don't actually stop to investigate because it's close to 1 AM now, and we want to get back home, and what was that? I don't know if anybody's heard anything familiar happening in that area before, but I cannot make out what it could have been. Hello everyone. So I was riding my motorcycle on a small mountain pass in western Switzerland. The night was pretty clear, thanks to the moon and the very snowy mountains who were reflecting the light. But there was no snow where I was. It was basically all on higher land. I was driving pretty fast because of the cold air, which was hurting my knees and fingers, and I had a strong urge to get back in my warm bed when, in a turn, just before a bridge, I see what appears to be a wounded man, kneeling by the side of the road, holding his stomach. Car crashes are common on this road, so I slowed up to see if everything was okay, when the guy stood up really quick. I only saw him clearly when he crosses the road thanks to my headlights, and it was creepy. It looked like a living rotten corpse, and I only see a glimpse of his face. It was like, the only thing that come to my mind to define it is a plate of pasta. Now, I saw it running through the field on all fours, then standing on 2 legs, looking at me for a second or two, then walking away calmly into the woods. I immediately took a small trowel and crossed into the woods, but I never saw him again. Even if we have strange creatures roaming around, I don't know what this could have been. When I was around 12 or 13, I was in middle school at the time, waiting around for a bus to stop and the sun was rising. I was mindlessly looking around when I captured a glimpse of something quite tall in a tree. It looked heavy set and I can make out wings. I saw it move a little and I freaked out. Now, I ended up running towards the bus, but I turn around and the creature is gone. I figured I'd totally imagined the whole thing. I was still very tired, and it was early or whatever. Fast forward to a few weeks later, it's about 9 PM and dark outside. I'm in my room watching TV when all of a sudden I hear banging and yelling at my window. I look out my window to see my best friend. I open the window and, like a crazy person, climbs through telling me to close the window. Turns out that he claimed to have saw something in the park with huge wings and it was chasing him from the park. This is the last time I heard about the creature until my sister called a month ago or so, asking, "What is the creature I saw?" I told her it was years ago and I can't remember a whole lot, and I figured it was a hallucination, but she starts telling me about a story her husband was telling her about a flying creature that chased him and his friends at the exact same park in the middle of the night. What we recounted seemed pretty accurate to my experience. To the best of my knowledge, this creature reminded me of Gagalor. I can try and recount more, but I don't know what it could have been. During the fires that consumed Mount Charleston, Nevada, my parents drove out to the mountain where the roads were clear. They described the wildlife to be running around the cars as these drove through the open road. My dad told my mum to stop the car, and he got out and started walking through the desert. He realized that the wilderness is running, including snakes and other deadly animals. He witnesses a moose/elk in the distance that was looking at him, but walked off in the direction of the rabbits and other wildlife. As he gets in the vehicle, both my parents and father describe seeing a tall man crouched over in front of the car, wings draped over his back. As he stands, he faces them. His wingspan is wide enough to cover the entire two-lane road and lifts him off the ground in 4 swooshes. Apparently he's quite muscular, with broad shoulders and arms and legs. But the face was mesmerizing. They could only describe it as not exactly human, more man-bird-like. The Mothman was a topic of the discussion to both of them. I wonder if anybody else has had anything similar that they've experienced. The setting is 1940, and my grandpa at the time was a young boy. Now, his parents had lived through the Great Depression, so it wasn't really a big thing to him to have to worry about money. He'd actually spent the majority of his life just being cautious of things. He's one of those who would literally save every penny. I think once you've gone through an experience like that, it really truly never does leave you. Now, he had quite a few different jobs. Back then it was really difficult to actually maintain a job, but one that he really liked was being what we now call a park ranger. He said he liked the fact that he would have regular jobs and he wouldn't have to worry so much. This is before people become as infatuated with technology too, of course, so people were more in touch with their surroundings, and being out there in the woods wouldn't really matter too much to him. Now, he had a number of strange experiences that he couldn't believe himself, which he's passed down to me over the years. One was while he was stationed and they were building a new cabin for someone. Basically, one of the locals lost their home in a fire and they were building a new one. He said the guy was really nice. Now, they'd actually been working with him for a number of weeks. He got to know the guy and said that he was really friendly. Apparently, he would never really say too much. My grandfather thought it was because of the fire that he didn't really talk to people so much, and he said he appreciated that his mind was probably in a completely different place to everybody else's. I mean, heck, he lost everything, what can you expect? And this was before insurance was really as common as it is today, and not everybody could afford it back then, so he was definitely struggling. Apparently he had some interesting stories, but he would never really talk to people much about them. So they go about building this thing, and eventually he doesn't take much notice and just talks to his other colleagues. He said it was backbreaking work. Apparently because of where this thing was being built, they had to carry everything by hand, and that could be an exhausting prospect. But every so often, that guy would just show up out of nowhere and offer them help. He really said to him, "No man, you've just got to rest and let us do it." But it didn't happen. He would always come and help them. He said they were pretty close to finishing, and one day it rained really heavily, and it was annoying because they didn't have the roof structure completely in place, so there were holes and things leaking down. He said that he was sitting there drinking coffee with that other guy, and again he didn't say anything. He just said that "I've got to go now," and got up and walked out. He said goodbye and to have a nice evening, and just sat about drinking the rest of the coffee. He couldn't figure out where the guide went though. He obviously didn't have a home as such to go to, so it was pretty hard to track him. Apparently, nobody could actually figure out where this guy was going to. He would just get up without warning and seemingly vanish sometimes. But again, not too much to think here. So that happens for a while, and eventually, my grandpa comes in again for work one day. He comes in and starts to make coffee and realizes that the other guy had left his coffee on the floor from the night before. Now the second he touches the cup, instantly everything looks different. He's no longer standing in a small cabin, but now instead standing in a much larger one. He looks around and he says he was really confused. He thought he'd actually gone to the wrong place and just wasn't really focused on his surroundings enough, because apparently there was a whole house here, and it looked relatively new, but not brand new, kind of like it was inhabited. He said he went around saying hello, going from room to room, trying to figure out if anybody else was there with him, but he wouldn't get a reply. Now apparently he actually found it really spooky that there was some kind of radio playing in the background, but he couldn't figure out what language it was speaking in. It was definitely weird. He had a look and literally explored everywhere but couldn't find a person, and he was now worried that he'd somehow gone into the wrong house and not realised it. You know, this was back in the day, so not everything was really done with planning permission or anything. It was completely normal to have houses like this. I guess people didn't want to pay taxes or something. Then he realises something's odd. There's smoke. It literally seems to have just come out of nowhere, and he can't see the source of a fire, but it made him panic. He then turns around and realises that part of the structure is completely burning, and the roof is about to collapse. He sprints outside, panicking, not knowing what to do. He then turns around, and he can see what he can only describe as some kind of spaghetti-looking man, completely burned and charred, who raises up towards the window, then falls back down again, disappearing. Apparently, my grandfather then goes to wipe his eyes and look round for help, and turns back and the whole place is gone, like it never happened. My grandfather was very God-fearing, and he starts praying immediately for protection and starts holding the cross that he was wearing. He gets really spooked out and turns around and sprints back. He then explains to me that apparently he just went home. He said that he couldn't really bear the thoughts of it all, and not knowing what happened or if it was real. Well, eventually he goes back to work the next day, and apparently that's when he says, "Where's the other guy we're building the house for?" The other workers there look at him confused, and he says, "You know, the other guy." They ask for his name, and he eventually figures it out, and they say, "No, he died long ago. We're building up the house for his family, not him." And my grandfather was absolutely dumbstruck. He said that he'd known this guy over weeks and they got on pretty well. He then describes exactly what he looks like and he says, "No, he died in the fire. Did you not hear?" My grandfather kind of shudders. He says he can feel ghosts going through him when he tells this story, and he actually looks quite sad. He doesn't know what it could have been. He said it could have all been in his mind, but how could he have possibly described the person so well, having never met him? It was especially odd. There's another story of his which I'd like to share to you all too. This goes while he was doing his ranger work. Now again, this is back in the day, and they would kind of have them doing virtually everything. My grandpa was pretty up for it though, because this is so long ago that you didn't really have job security, and it wasn't long after the war, so you really took whatever you could. Now he actually had some brothers which went and fought in the war too, but luckily he just avoided it. He had some kind of eye issue and they weren't going to send him out there. He said that on this particular day, he was basically sent to look for some people who had apparently gone missing surveying caves. Now this isn't something my grandpa had any experience in whatsoever. They said to him, "You ever done this before?" And he said, yeah, I've done all kinds of caving in my time. He was completely lying, just he was scared to lose the job. He did have a big piece of rope though, and that's what he was planning to use to go and look for people. Now it's pretty well known today that a lot of missing people actually turn out to have got lost exploring caves and whatnot. Maybe they were just looking for shelter or an escape, but again, back then, they weren't so sure about it. My grandpa then bravely decides to investigate. He said that on this particular day, the sun was only slightly up in the air. It was pretty cold and rainy, and my grandpa was looking towards getting out from the rain and just having a bit of a rest. He knew that he couldn't go too far in the cave, but he was going to give it a good chance. What was worse is all he had basically was a candle for light. He's got the lighter too, which he can use as a backup, so he's not too bothered. Yeah, that guy was braver than I was, I'll tell ya. He eventually comes past some train tracks that he's familiar with. He looks both sides for trains and can't see any, so crosses and proceeds. He had an extremely good knowledge of the area, so he wasn't too worried and didn't bother bringing a map. It was pretty hardcore back then, but to them it was just normal, so I guess that you're just getting on with your job. So he continues trekking and ploughing through the forest, but he doesn't seem to be able to locate the cave at first. Apparently it's really annoying him. He doesn't want to be out there in the dark because he doesn't know if he can definitely navigate back like that. I mean, as long as he finds the train tracks, he knows that he'll be fine. He said that he was walking and then eventually become closer to a river which he was very familiar with, and he felt much better now. He stops for a moment to listen to the sounds of the water, thinking, wow, what if there actually is someone lost in here? How am I going to be able to bring them back if they're not able to move? He was a pretty strong guy, but I guess that he knew his limits too. He finds lots of downed trees here. The storm didn't pass so long ago. My grandpa's convinced that somebody went out here and got lost in the storm seeking shelter from the cave. He's just more worried about keeping his stuff dry though. But eventually, there it is, the mouth of the cave. At first it looks like somebody's standing there, but my grandpa can't be sure. He calls out hello and waves his arms around, but there's no response. He then looks to the ground ahead of himself and jumps over a small stream and proceeds. If there was a person, they're gone now. Maybe they were looking for somebody too, he thinks, as he crosses over. He now enters the mouth of the cave, and he said he tries to light up his candle, but it doesn't work. He tries again, but it just doesn't seem to take, so he decides to go as far in as he can without being able to see. He calls out hello a few more times, and there's no reply once more. He gets to pretty much the limit and stops for a while, trying to get the candle to light. He's not stupid, he's trying his very best to preserve the lighter fluid that he has. He knows that thing wasn't full, and he wasn't going to get paid to replace another one. It was his own thing. He decides this is as good a spot as ever to tie himself up with the rope. He can just about see daylight behind him, and he's able to finally get the candle to light. As the light comes on, he can hear something scurrying away. Now he's not entirely sure what this is. At first it sounds like it could have been an animal, but it sounds like a pretty large one. I guess they're trying to get out of the rain too and take some shelter, he thinks to himself. He can hear water dripping too. He knows that he hasn't got much time with his candle, but he proceeds anyway. He said his rope was extremely long. He's been carrying it on his shoulder the whole time, and he knows that this is going to be the limit of where he can explore. So he proceeds and keeps calling out hello but doesn't get a reply. The cave is getting more and more narrow now as he proceeds, and he has to turn a corner. He does so cautiously, making sure that the rope isn't on a jagged edge because he doesn't want it to become cut off. Now he gets deeper into the cave. He's probably about halfway on his rope now, as he slowly takes another piece off his shoulder as he goes deeper and deeper in. Now he gets to a point where he can see some kind of movement just up ahead. He says, "Hey, I'm here to rescue you. Come on, let's go. I don't have much time on the candle." But it seems like every time he gets closer, this person seems to be getting further and further away. He describes them as wearing some kind of black robes or something, or maybe like some kind of nightgown. He said that the clothes appear very ragged, and he can't make out much of them other than that they're very hunched over. They seem to be wearing something on their head, and at first my grandpa thinks it's a bandage. He said, "Come on now," getting annoyed, becoming more and more agitated. He said that he's not ready to risk his life for somebody else, but he really wants to get this job done, so he proceeds. He said that he's running and really chasing after this person. He's getting burnt every so often by the candle. He's holding it backwards to try and stop it going out, but every so often he has to put it back alight again. He then feels a pop. At first he thinks that the rope has become unlocked on something and he's not too bothered. He's quite surprised now though, as he's gone further than he thought he could on the rope. He calls out, "Hey, whoever you are, this is it. If I can't get you soon, then I'm not going to find you." He then goes to pull on the rope and realizes there's a lot of slack on it. He starts to shoulder it again, trying to figure out how far he's got, when something doesn't make sense. He seems to have a lot of rope, more than he remembered bringing, until eventually he pulls very quick, while actually dropping the candle in shock because he realizes that the rope's come off. God. He fumbles around for a second, but luckily sparks his lighter again, giving him just enough visibility to see where he is. He now realizes that something or someone has bit through part of the rope. He says, "God, these rats are annoying," thinking it was those, as he then hears something behind him. He then turns around to face whatever it is, but can't see anything, and throws the rope on the ground now. He decided to set fire to it. Now he said he was doing so he's able to light his way a bit better, dragging it behind him. Yeah, he was a pretty cool guy, very ingenious in situations like this. The only problem though was he knew the air quality wasn't very good down here, and he was burning the last air that he probably had, but he wasn't going to be able to get his way out otherwise, and he could probably smell the burning parts to figure out where he come from. So once more, my grandpa proceeds going the way that he had come. He realizes something's very off now, and he can't describe the feeling. He always tells me that his biggest regret was not buying a rifle or some kind of weapon to bring with him. The problem is, if he shot it in a cave though, he probably would have went deaf, but he couldn't hear well to begin with. So he starts walking, but eventually the light goes out again, and eventually he drops the rope. It's burning for a little bit, then just won't seem to take anymore. Then he feels something on his shoulder. It's like something's touched him that feels weird and feathery, or maybe like moss brushing on his shoulder. He goes to swipe it off when he feels a hand. He gasps loudly and turns around to see what it is, but he can't find anything there. He can suddenly feel water on his back, and he thinks maybe he's got wet somehow. The candles are now completely out, and he's down to his lighter only. He does start to panic now, he admits finally, as he feels something on his ankle. As he turns to go away, something grabs at him. He's pretty sure it's the rope, so he just kicks and eventually becomes free from it. But now his leg feels wet. That was confusing. He gets up and starts running, turning on the lighter every few seconds to be able to see where he's going. Then crash. He goes straight into a rock. He said that when he woke up, he was extremely disorientated and wondered if he'd actually slept outside. He said he felt absolutely horrible. He said he felt something on his leg, and at first he thought it was a rat trying to eat him, so he kicks down very hard. He then feels something hard and hears a screech. He then quickly reaches for the lighter and can't find it, but then he finds it again and flicks it on. He said he was face to face with something, bent over trying to literally eat at him. He doesn't know if it's a crazy cannibal or what it is because he never saw its face, but there was something green on its head. He's always been fixated on that one fact. He said, how was it green? The maybe inch or so of flesh that he saw was disgusting looking, necrotic and rotting. He said he screamed, thinking that he's just run into Satan himself, and starts running, again using his lighter to guide his way. He said that he doesn't know how he found his way out, but he gets back to roughly where he started and he can see the edge of his rope. He picked it up and threw it behind himself, not sure if he was being chased or not. He said that as he got out of the mouth of the cave, it becomes clear that he's bleeding a lot, but he said that there was too much powerful emotions running, so he was able to keep up the pace. As he leaves the mouth of the cave, he hears something. There's some kind of movement behind him, but he doesn't bother to check what it was. He said he somehow got back to the train tracks in about 20 minutes, running through the rain. He was really worried and told me that he knew he's going to have to get maggots to stop an infection. Yeah, this was back in the day, like I said, so medicine wasn't quite so advanced then, and that's something he had been doing for a while, with other kinds of infections that he couldn't seem to treat. He said that he runs and eventually gets back to the other guys, screaming in pain. He said that they tended to his wounds and put some kind of lotion thing on it, and it was horrible. I think it was like iodine or something, for which made it really sting. He put a sock in his mouth to bite down on as they done it, and they screamed, "What happened?" He explains what had happened, and they look at him very scared. They thought that maybe the rats had got him, but he was convinced it was something different. On his shoulder and other parts of his body were deep gouges too, which were clearly caused by some kind of blade or large animal, but it seems more like a tear mark than a clean wound. He said that he couldn't stop shaking, and he went to the priest straight after to have an exorcism. Apparently, a lot of the other guys there and some of the locals actually all grabbed torches the next day, had some priests and went down to the cave to try and take out the demon which lived in there. Well, they only got to the mouth of the cave, and the priest declared that whatever was in there was gone now. And they all went back and head back, very happy with this, and my grandpa said that he was also happy with this fact too. Apparently over the years, there were sightings of someone or something just lurking around in the centre of the cave, never actually coming out too far to be seen, but visible. All my life, my grandfather has proclaimed that that was the devil that he encountered in the cave, and the exorcist got rid of it. But I just wonder what on earth could that have actually been? What attacked my grandpa that day? My grandfather was a park service ranger, and he would always tell me these stories. Apparently, on the plot of land that he owned, there was some kind of weird figure that would appear every so often. Now, you couldn't ask him exactly what it was and get necessarily a clear answer, because it would change from time to time. He basically wasn't sure exactly what it was, and each time he would describe it different, usually using the different emotions of which he felt while spotting it. Exactly the same thing would happen with my grandma. Sometimes it was like this thing was angry, sometimes it was like it was hurting, sometimes it was like it was lonely, and sometimes it was like it was lost. But one thing was sure, they always reported seeing it, and it actually gone back to their parents and grandparents. Now apparently there was some kind of ancient burial site upon this land, and I didn't know about it until I got older. But allegedly, there have been multiple sightings of something tall, skeletal in appearance, which apparently would roam the land randomly. The first time of which it was sighted was near the small river and the lake that's on the back of their property. Apparently, it was seen virtually hovering across the water by my great-grandpa. Apparently he was hunting one day and stopped for a while to rest by it when he saw this thing. Apparently it scared him so much that he actually tried to fire shots at it. He said either he had the worst aim in the world that day, or that thing was some kind of spirit and the shots were going through it. He didn't know. He was so scared that he actually left his gun there. It was out of ammo by that point, but he wanted to get away as quick as possible and not necessarily carry any dead weight whatsoever. The next time it was spotted was by his wife a few years later. Apparently she was out trying to pick wild berries on their property one day when she could see a skeletal head staring at her from behind a tree. At first she thought it was some kind of animal that had died there many years ago and they hadn't realised, but then she said the thing moved. So weird sightings actually come from their guests too, and not only them. Even all the way up to my grandpa. Apparently my grandpa first realised it was there when he was there during one Christmas. And apparently he was out playing with some of the other kids and he noticed a strange gown. He said this time it was red in colour, which was weird because usually it appears as black. At first he thought it was a tree, or at least the stump of a tree, of which was different colour to the rest of the woods, until he realised it was moving and he can see a face. The way that he describes it, now God bless him, he doesn't have much knowledge of Star Wars, but he said it looked like one of the characters with 4 lightsabers. I can't remember the specific name, but you know the one when it's got its hood up, but if it was red. From the sounds of that story, I was pretty creeped out by my grandpa, but then he says there was more. Apparently, there was another time that he was playing with his friends, and he actually saw multiple of this thing. Weirdly, apparently it also had glowing orange eyes. That's how he noticed there was more than one. He can't say for absolute certain because it was quite dark at this time, but he's pretty convinced it was, and they weren't isolated incidents. Now, I actually spent a lot of time out of there. I ended up spending quite a lot of time to just get away from my parents. At least that's what I think they were doing. My grandparents had a lot of time to look after me, so I was often there. My memory of my grandparents was absolutely loving. Like, I honestly couldn't have asked for better grandparents who were more loving or caring. It's something I don't think I really appreciated so much when I was young, actually, because they were kind of always there. So it's something that I kind of got a better appreciation for and grasp as when they weren't here, which I always regretted. But anyway, so I remember taking some walks there during the summertime when I was a bit younger. I've grown up with these stories pretty much all my life, so probably about 8 or 9 out of 10 times that I'd actually go out there, I was half expecting to have some kind of horrifying encounter. Though it never really happened, I actually went out there multiple times with an overactive imagination, really wishing that something would happen to me. The stupidest thing I ever did was I actually called for it a few times. Now, I don't know why I actually did this, but again, nothing would happen. I remembered one specific day though when I was out there, There seemed to be some kind of haze up ahead. It was almost like there was a big filter, and there was some kind of fog which wasn't there before suddenly over part of the scenery. I do think to myself that this is particularly weird. It's something I haven't seen before and my young mind can't comprehend it. I had a really weird feeling too, and strangely there was some kind of static in the air which was making the fibres on my jumper stand up and also the hair on my arms and the hair on my head. I looked up scared there was going to be a lightning strike. I've been told about them before. This was before you had the videos to watch on the internet, but I was aware of it. I think maybe they told me in school about it one day, but I digress. I did look up and there was no rain clouds whatsoever. So I think this is specifically weird. It's almost like I'd walked into some kind of electrical storm, of which there was no storm, just the electrical aspects of it. So this was a deeply weird moment. I kind of felt uncomfortable. I've looked up the feeling later on in life, and it's similar to what those experience when they're in the vicinity of infrasound. Just a deep unhappiness and feeling that something is off, where your mind and body can't comprehend what's happening. I remembered walking around for a while. I kind of wanted to see the Reaper thing. Every time I said the word Reaper, my grandpa would say, no, that's not it, no. But that's how I described it, and that's how it sounded. So yeah, I was looking for this thing constantly, but nothing would happen, so I headed back. I think this was really odd. I remembered when I got home, my grandparents asked what was wrong with my hair, and I said, I don't know, some kind of storm. They both looked at each other and my grandpa laughed. He knew there wasn't a storm. It was really nice and sunny outside. He thought I was just messing around or something, or had wore one of his hats and not said. He actually brought this up and I said, no, I'm serious. That's what it was. He then laughs and we go about our day. I constantly pester him though to learn more and more about the Reaper. He tells me not to call it that. He describes it as an entity, but I continue with my term. I say, how do you feel when it's there? What happens? He says, I don't know, you just kind of feel off, almost like you're being hunted, and you'll know when that thing is there. You feel like you're being watched. I've had it times where I could look up between two trees and there was something staring at me through them. As I locked eyes, my vision would go blurry and there it would be, that horrible skeleton looking thing. Apparently too, sometimes it would appear with more of a horse head, which actually sounded more scary to me. Whenever you actually got to where it was before, there was also a bad smell allegedly. The thing that I wasn't too scared about though is that apparently it never actually harmed anyone or anything. Well, at least that's what I thought. Apparently, they had a pet dog there before which everybody loved. It was a really nice Labrador and it would roam the land freely. However, one night, the dog didn't come back and they start to panic a little bit. They think, oh god, what if this dog has actually gone into the river and drowned? Then one of the neighbours actually reported seeing something by it, and the description sounded like our dog or an animal very similar to it. So worried, we decide to head over and see what's wrong, my grandfather says. When they get there, they can only describe a scene out of a horror film. Apparently the dog was there, but it was entirely drained of blood, and there were some bite marks near its neck. I don't know what kind of creature could have possibly done that. I just knew that it was one that I did absolutely not want to encounter now or at any point in the future. So what did you do, Grandpa? I buried it, very deep in the ground. He said weirdly though, no flowers seemed to grow around there, or plants, or anything, not even moss. I now feel a little more unsettled and I start to sweat a little bit as I'm uncomfortable in my chair. I actually felt quite stressed out by hearing that. I can see by the look in my grandpa's face that he wishes that he didn't tell me that, and I was probably too young to hear it. He says, now son, listen to me. Don't be scared to go out of there. Haven't seen it for years. It could have been anything. I mean, that was kind of a back in my day thing. Now you're probably safe out there. Yeah, great, I thought. I could not stop thinking about this thing. The problem was too, like I said, this is back in the day when that, you can only really research things through libraries or actually seeing them and experiencing things. But again, I'm not going to go to the library. And why not explore? For a couple of weeks, I actually refused to go out through the forest, but eventually the curiosity and inquisitive part of me took over, so I head out once more. I'm going down a trail and walking down quite a steep incline. My grandpa was supposed to repair stairs here, but he hasn't. Well, kind of more like board decking, but it's quite annoying really. I eventually make it down and I get my white shoes very dirty. I'm just going to wash them off in the lake later on though, I think. Now, as I continue down doing my exploring, I'm pretty convinced nothing is going to happen when I see something odd. I can see a hand moving behind a tree. It's a very white hand too at that. It almost looked impossibly white. Then the clouds move behind the sun and I can see that it's kind of like a dark yellow colour. That's odd. It looks extremely skinny. I thought maybe it was some kind of animal. It kind of looked more like a chicken leg, I guess, than anything, but I didn't dare get closer to it as I saw one of the thumbs moving. I'm now not sure if what I was looking at was some kind of caterpillar or something similar to that, as I'd start to make my slow retreat to get away from it. I think it's weird. Just as this happens, that weird static starts to pick up in the air again and I can taste a metallic thing in my mouth. I don't know what it is, but I have a cold sweat now, and I quickly head back to my grandpa's. I decided not to say what had happened because I wasn't likely to be allowed out again if I said that I've gone off exploring on my own without telling anyone. My excuse for going out there was something much different, so I knew it wouldn't necessarily sit well if they'd found out what had actually happened. So now, I just go to bed. But I can't stop thinking of it. There was just something odd about it. I had no idea what I'd seen at that time, and that part of me was eating me up. So I decided to do another adventure. Now this is the following day. I go to the exact spot where the hand is, and while I'm walking there, I can't get the possibilities out of my head. I wish I had somebody else there with me to go exploring with, but I think my grandpa's going to be annoyed if I tell him. He was also doing some work on the cars now. He'd actually made me promise him before that I wouldn't go out there too far on my own, and I made a promise and I wasn't going to break that because it would upset him. I was being brave though. I was just hoping I wouldn't end up like the dog. Now I make it to the exact tree where I saw the hand, and weirdly, some of the ground below it seems to have died. It's almost like you've got all these perfectly healthy trees everywhere, but suddenly, on this specific one, just where the hand was, it seems like it's just dead, like loose bark, and also the ground doesn't have any plants which seem to be surviving. I do check a couple of times to make sure that this is actually the exact same tree, and it turns out that it is, which again is super weird for me. I'm not sure what to think of it. I decide to explore further and further. Now I do this for quite a long time, because eventually the sun starts to set, and I now realise that it's time for me to get back. That's when I noticed something strange that I didn't before. There's some kind of pile of sticks in the ground that wasn't there before. I initially thought it was my grandpa making some kind of bonfire or something, so I'm actually more confident and happy in this moment. I'm expecting to see him and to go and say hello to him, and to have a little explore around together. Well, I get closer and closer and I realise that something is quite odd actually. It seems like this little pile is not sticks, they're bones. Now I don't know where these bones could have possibly come from. I go to pick one up, but I'm froze there for a second. Something just felt odd, and I have that strange feeling coming over me again. Like something is odd, and something bad might be about to happen. Now it sounds very similar to what my grandpa described, with the feelings of everything. And I notice this is strange. The pile was probably about 2 feet tall, and I thought that was extremely weird. I then head back, I don't get too far back when I hear some kind of language spoke. I thought maybe it was somebody from a foreign place, but it sounds different. It's almost like very loud deep sounds in a quick succession which then stop, and some kind of growling type sound. I'm froze there trying to see where this is coming from, and I just cannot find it. Now, I decide to turn away from this. I don't want to scare myself. It's getting dark and I'm not far away from getting in trouble with my grandpa and my grandma and my parents, and I don't want to have to suffer the consequences of that. So I continue bounding along until I'm halfway back. I don't hear the sounds again, but I think this is rather odd. Then, as I'm halfway back, I see something from behind a tree, which I can't describe. Somebody steps out who I'd have to describe as about 7 feet tall, wearing a very flowing gown. And I look up, and I can see dark holes where eyes are supposed to be, and I see the face of a skeleton, and something animated moving around with it. It's not moving normally, it's kind of dancing, zigzagging from side to side, almost like it's glitching for a second. I say, huh? I say grandpa, thinking that it's him somehow, but it isn't. I look around and everything seems so dark, and it sounds like a storm's about to pick up. I'm froze there for a while, as this thing seems to slowly edge towards me. It's very hard to tell what direction that it's actually going in, because it kind of moves backwards before it goes forward. I decide to walk further down. I'm actually closer to home this way to see if this thing's following me, and it seems to. I was honestly awestruck by this. I didn't immediately connect the dots of what I was seeing to what my grandpa had described before, and other members of my family, but I moved down a bit further now. This thing was moving extremely slow. I mean, probably like quarter of my walking speed. For a good 5 or 10 minutes, I kept changing directions to see if this thing would stop following me, but it wasn't. It was getting closer and I didn't realise it at first, until I can see more and more detail. This thing looked just like the Reaper, just as I thought, and now the cards all fell on me at once. I scream and start running, and just like in your dreams, I seem to run extremely slow. I don't know where this was actually, I still don't to this day, but my legs were probably so scared that I couldn't run with any kind of pace whatsoever. So I'm left there trying desperately to get away from this thing, going slow as anything, and I seem to be not going much quicker myself. I heard snapping sounds now too. They're very loud, almost like gunshots, but it sounded like something was snapping in half constantly. I eventually make it back towards where my grandparents' house is. I was absolutely covered in sweat, and my grandma finds me there and says, "God, did you go swimming?" I say no, and I can't let out the words. I eventually get back in, and she punishes me and tells me off for going swimming in the lake. I get told to bath off quickly, and that I better explain to my grandpa why I was swimming out there. I'm stuck in the bath, literally shivering. It was a hot bath too. That's how scared I was. When I saw my grandpa, I actually didn't have the heart to tell him what I was doing and what I saw. It wasn't until months later that I could actually reveal what happened and why I wouldn't go out of the house and why I was so scared that night. He then looks at me and says, "I know what you saw, son, just please don't go out there again." And I agreed. I never did. Eventually I got older and completely forgot about the experience. That was until I had a bad dream which reminded me of it. I don't actually believe the Reaper's a real thing, but I don't know how else to describe what I saw that day. I want you guys to let me know what you think it could have been. I don't know if my incidents were isolated too, but I'm really having nightmares about it again and I want them to stop. I want to get closure to this. I currently work as a forest service worker. I'd done this for not too many years and something jogged my memory recently. This is something that happened when I was much younger, and is something that I've not really been able to forget. It was I and a group of friends who decided to explore a cabin which had been long abandoned in a forested area close to where we all lived. We were all excited to go there. There were rumours that there was more than meets the eye there. We basically were convinced that it was haunted and that we're going to find all kinds of ghosts and things there. You know, just typical things to get teenage boys excited about exploring, so we head out. As we head out, it had been raining recently, and our parents told us not to get dirty. I actually had a big umbrella, so I was pretty happy. I knew too that I could probably utilise this as some kind of weapon if I really needed. So we're heading out into the forest, and it has a really cool vibe to it. We're pretty sure where this thing is, and we're excited to go. There were the odd leaves falling down, and it wasn't too far away from Halloween, so we were definitely ready to be spooked out. It's funny saying that in hindsight. So we start walking when suddenly a man appears on the path up ahead. He looks pretty weird with a long white beard. He's saying things but kind of stopping every few seconds. Nobody understands what he wants, but he looks really weird. He suddenly locks eyes with me and for some reason just won't stop staring at me. I find this especially weird, and I felt like I was almost caught in a trance while making eye contact with this weirdo. I tell him to leave me alone. Eventually though, he walks off into the stream, literally into the water going uphill. I don't know how he was able to do so, but he literally just takes off, and that was the last we ever saw of him. We look at each other and decide to start jogging a bit. The thing is, we don't know who this person is or why he's out here, but he's definitely weird. Maybe it's some kind of guy that likes to live off the land or something, who knows. But we left him to go his separate way to us. I felt pretty good at the time. I felt like this is it. This is what we wanted. Everything's coming together suddenly, and this is the moment that we've been waiting for. We start to make up some things and imagine that he's probably come from the cabin that we're heading to. We eventually see the cabin, and that thing looked scary. It was almost like it had just been planted in the middle of nowhere. This is long before we had mobile phones or any good way to communicate with our parents, so you really felt the desolation of the area. Especially because, well, we lived in a pretty remote area to begin with, but if you go into the forest, there's all kinds of crazy things out here. We had regular sightings of Bigfoots and UFOs, you know, all the good stuff. But this thing felt different. We bravely start making our way towards the cabin. Apparently there's another group of friends who one of the people I'm with knows, and said allegedly if you go there on your own at night, crazy things will happen to you. The ghosts will try and kill you. As he said that, my friend made me jump and it annoyed me. But we pressed forward and eventually get to the cabin. There was no door to worry about. We ended up heading in, and I can see a way down to a cellar. Now this is interesting. This wasn't on the script. We knew there was more to this place, but none of us expected to find something like that so early. So that was definitely an interesting moment for us. We have a look around, and there doesn't seem to be anybody else present. That's when we realise it. We call him Steve. Crazy Steve has appeared again. He seems to have a pan on his head too, which was really weird. We think, God, does he live here? Is he cooking? But he can't be, the place is abandoned. He's just watching from behind a rock, saying all kinds of gibberish, but clearly in our direction. You know the homeless guy who ends up in the freezer on The Simpsons? Well, it kind of looked like him. He's wearing actually similar clothes, which is quite funny thinking of it now. He doesn't seem to be getting any closer though, so we decide to investigate a bit more. I know this probably isn't smart or wise to turn your back on an absolute weirdo living out there, but he seems to be relatively harmless. I can't stop thinking about that basement though. What could be in there? It was definitely odd. So we wait in here for a little while, and we realise that Steve's got a bit closer now. He's moved even further along to a rock. He always seems to hide behind these big rocks or trees, like he knows what he's doing to not be seen by us. Yeah, I'm getting more and more freaked out now, and we decide that we should probably go back. Now we've decided to start picking up the pace a little bit. We've started running now to try and get away from him. At first he doesn't do anything. Then a loud thud happens and I'm forced to look behind myself. There he is, throwing something towards us. It's a pan. We can hear more gibberish in a very loud and dark tone, and we can hear pat pat pat. He's chasing after us. My god, was he quick. One of my friends screams out, how can this old guy be so quick? Honestly, it was almost inhuman, the pace that he set. He was gaining on us, and all of us were pretty healthy and should have had much more pace on him, but we don't seem to in that moment, and it's really frustrating. We start running as fast as we possibly can, desperate to get away from this weirdo. Eventually we make it out of the forest and we seem to have lost him. What the heck was that? We all say, as we're all entirely dumbfounded as to who that was and why he was chasing us. We eventually get back home safely and not too much else happens, but something was stuck in my mind. I just couldn't forget about that guy in that cabin. I don't know why, and that led me to a few years later, when I was in the area on my own. When I got a bit older, I got into the habit of going for night walks in that place. I'd long forgotten about that guy for the meantime, and I felt pretty safe out there. I was going for one of my night jogs actually on this specific occasion, one where I was my typical indecisive self, and I couldn't decide whether to jog or walk, so I did both periodically. And would you know, there's a cabin up ahead. It looks so nice, so inviting and enticing. And there's the thunder. A storm was brewing. It just felt too perfect and excellent to be out there. I suddenly got buckets of energy from who knows where, and I decided that it's my time to investigate alone. I wanted to know what was in that basement. Nobody had told me this stuff before, and the adrenaline and excitement was taking over for me. I take a moment to look around and I think, Steve, I hope you're not here now. As I go in and I say sorry, almost as though I was acknowledging in my head that what I was about to do wasn't smart, but I was going to do it anyway. So off I go, towards the cabin. Every footstep I take, I can feel my heart beating quicker and quicker as I get closer and closer to this cabin. And what do you know? The next moment I'm in there. Yes, it's just like I remember. It's almost like every room that I look into is another part of nostalgia for me as I feel more and more excited seeing it. You know what, I'm going to come back here with all my buddies. We've got to do this again and explore. And then I see it. The path with stairs, and I can't help but go into it. So I do so, and I go up initially, then I go down, deeper and deeper. This place is huge. Something falls next to me and I can hear almost an echo, a reverberation. Wow, this is cool. I then realise that it goes on quite far, and I want to see how far this thing actually goes. So off I go. There's quite a large concrete wall to my left, then a small tunnel which goes off to the right next to it. I actually have a flashlight with me, so I flick it on for a second. I tied it onto my sweatband that I'm wearing, and I've got pretty good visibility. I had to put my sweatband the wrong way, kind of having it vertically on my head, but it does the job perfectly. I was almost like a surgeon or mechanic now, operating with true precision. So I start making my way along when suddenly I see a drop up ahead of me. I slowly feel around the sides of it, and it doesn't seem too large. I can see the bottom for a second with my flashlight, and would you know, the thing falls off. It knocks itself out along with the battery at the same time, and I can't find it, so I go to turn back, and then I feel warmth up my arm, and suddenly a pulse. It's my pulse. I'm grabbed and almost fall headfirst into the tunnel, but I stop myself and scream. Something is gripping onto me. I reach down and feel a hand, a human arm. I cannot seem to loosen this thing's grip until I smash it as hard as I can. I actually miss and really hurt my hand hitting the side at first, but I'm able to get free. I don't hear anything after that and I scurry back screaming. I'm screaming every few seconds while I catch my breath and eventually make my way back up the stairs again. I start running and I can't really see clear. I realise now that lots of dust and things has kicked into my eyes and I say, how can this happen? It can't get worse for me. I can't see where I'm going, but luckily I know the area well as I run through some of the forestry. It seems like the forest is closing in on me as I get closer and closer to escaping. I kept up a beautiful pace and eventually make it to the border of the woods. I start screaming over and over again, not knowing what on earth happened to me. Was it Steve? Did he finally come back to get me? I don't know. I eventually make it home quickly and I tell my parents about what's happened, and my dad insists on calling the cops or going back there himself, but my mum says no, just leave it, it's probably just some weird homeless person out there. I then vowed to myself and my parents that I'm never going to go back there again, and you know what? I didn't. I never found out why that happened or who it was. I don't know what made me think of it again so much recently, but I just want the answers, but at the same time I don't. So for my first story, while my great-grandpa was young, he was working for someone who had sheep, and one night, one of the sheep went nuts. So during the night while they were asleep, they heard some noises and woke up to find the sheep having a sad one and walking. They tried to stop it, but it didn't listen. None of the sheep ever didn't respond before, so when the sheep turned around, it didn't really look like a sheep anymore, but something else. The voice was deeper, and it seemed to be walking on two legs. The face is distorted, and it definitely wasn't white anymore. My grandpa said that he was so scared after this he ran and never worked with that guy again. My second story. Now there's a lot of rumours about people using dark magic and evil things, and a guy my grandpa knew didn't believe these things were real. He kept walking around telling this to the locals at the cafes, and a weird old guy heard him. He was like, "You'll see tonight." So he sent a freaking weird donkey to find him. Apparently, it kept kicking him at night until he begged it to stop, and he said he believed it was some kind of demonic entity. For story 3, now, this is a neighbour of my grandpa's, and it happened while they're in their 20s. He was a man who went to church very often, always praying and believing in God, and it was like the devil tricked him every day. There was a boy who kept calling him at night at the stairwell of his home. He asked him to go outside and play, and after a while when he didn't join him, the boy basically turned to a black dog. That happened for a long time until they called the priest and it stopped. For number 4, this happened to one of my uncles. He came back from work at night late. They were working as farmers with clover. Anyway, there used to be a small narrow street that led to the house faster, but nobody went there during the night. It was across a road and there was a small faucet there too, but everybody avoided it at midnight. Well, my uncle decided to head down there faster, just to get home in case anything attacked him, but apparently he felt something grab him by the neck and pushed him down. He immediately starts saying a prayer, the Lord's Prayer, and the thing left. Possibly a demon. A priest later told him to never use that street, and guess what? The street doesn't exist anymore. There's a deserted house there now. God knows what's hiding in it. Now for the next story. My aunt used to hear a weird banging sound outside of her window after they moved into their new home, like somebody was chopping on wood. They often went outside to see if there was somebody, but nobody was there, and apparently they later learned that soldiers were killed in that place during the Second World War. For number 6, a UFO crashed. So crashing during the 90s summer, there was lots of sightings all around Greece, and one actually crashes in a hill next to my village. Number 7. So my cousin said that their clover field once again had something landing in it, because there was a crop circle or something for like 2 years and nothing ever grew there since. Number 8. We went with my grandpa to buy some cheese from a guy who's known to walk into his farm. I look around the walls and it's full of lashes, like whips that hit horses, but some of them were a bit too much, just like they're really super heavy. I said, "What's that?" It didn't look normal. My grandpa told me to shush and we walk home. So after we get home, he told me that the man calls demons and hits them. He asks them who they are, who they hurt, and hits them. So yeah, that was pretty creepy. Well, that's most of my stories from my village in Greece. I'll share more if I get them. Okay, so where do I start? I was walking up to my local park with 2 of my friends. It was about 9. There is a path when you first walk to the park that leads to this elementary school that I used to go to. There is a fence on the side of it. It's gated, and on the other side of the path is just a hill leading to the park. Then there is a street light on the path. We were walking past this and one of my friends said, "What's that?" We looked and kept walking towards what seems to be a dog. It was just frozen there staring at us. I got closer and it ran away, and then I saw its spine, and it was like nothing I've ever seen before. It had short legs, but it was weirdly long. That's not where it gets interesting though. We basically just walked up to the park. We were leaving about 10 minutes later anyway, and we were walking and wondering if we'd be able to see it again. So we stopped and started down the path. It's more like a concrete path. Then me and my one friend saw this stick-like man running down the hill towards the woods. It was going really quick. It hit the feet. It was maybe about 7 feet tall, or maybe a bit shorter, pointy legs and arms. I didn't really get a look at his head. I saw it for a good maybe 4 seconds. It wasn't really black, it was kind of black and grey. I saw it clearly, and it went in view and out of view suddenly. It was just running then. Before it got to the path, it vanished. It was terrifying. I got chills. I explained it, and then my other friend said that he saw the same thing. My other friend didn't though. I don't know why. We were going tonight again at the same time to do the same thing and see if we can get it on video. Hopefully I can capture it this time. So I'm going to get straight to the point. Back in the late 70s, my dad was working in a lumber mill in Indonesia during lumber mill related work moments. Now he said that one day he saw a crowd of people gathering around what appeared to be a makeshift cage made by locals. What really surprised him was what is inside the cage, a big primate standing up walking around, which is about 2 meters tall. He said the primate's colour is original and somewhat similar to an orangutan. What is even weirder is that the primate seems to be upset and crying. So, how did the ape fella end up in here, you might ask? Well, my father asked about this, and apparently a man said that somebody went missing and they went out hunting to find what had happened. During the search, one of them found huge footsteps that is so big it can't be made by man. So from here, they split up into smaller parties and do a search. Apparently the missing guy was found on a tree tied up with what seems to be a nest or something, so they help him, and he told them that he was kidnapped by an upstanding ape. Villagers get curious the next day and formed a search party for the ape. I don't know how, but my dad said somehow they found it and caged it. My dad didn't know what happened to the ape, but some of his colleagues said that apparently they killed it to avoid more kidnappings. The primate creature was female. The villagers speculate that it kidnapped the man for God knows what reasons. Now, I was in 8th grade, living in Bayeux in Louisiana. So, this is a normal morning for me. Around 6:30, I'm usually waiting on my school bus. The sun isn't up by then and it's very dark. My house had a floodlight on the side of it which shines onto our shed, which is behind our home and slightly to the right, so I have a perfect view of it, as well as a floodlit light on the front porch that lit up our yard. There's another light coming down. Well, I was waiting, looking back towards the shed, and I see what looks like 4 or 5 of these tall, maybe 7 feet tall, humanoid shadowy figures walking in a line along my shed. They seemed to phase through the fence, and when I say in a line, it was literally like they're holding hands and following each other, trying not to be seen. I think I'm losing it, until the next morning, I saw the same shadowy humanoid thing, except they're in the front yard walking around the trees very sneakily towards another area. And I know they could see me because they would peek their heads around the tree before they passed us if they didn't want to be seen. I'm 24 now and I can remember this like it happened yesterday. I don't know what these could have been, honestly. Now the following is a series of weird things that happened to me that I truly can't explain. Now what annoys me most about this is that I've tried to tell people my experience and they kind of just laugh it off. Actually, I told one of my colleagues at work today. I work as a Forest Server fire patrol person, but when I told them my story, they kind of just laughed at me and said, "Oh yeah, is that really what happened?" And that really annoys me. And this is supposed to be someone that's quite similar and that I'd actually consider a friend there, and also had weird experiences before, so I just don't get it. People are so eager to hear what you say, but then they're so happy and quick to dismiss everything. I just don't get it. But let's dive into my story and hopefully at least a few of you will understand. Now, emotionally, I wasn't really the same after this. I don't know why. I'm not a spiritual person and I don't really believe in religion much, but this kind of made me think about what else is really out there. Where I live, there can be lots of snow all the time, but I love to go on my little adventures, and there was a forest that was supposedly haunted near where I lived. Now, I'd heard quite a few things about this place, and apparently you'll hear screams in the night. You'll see headless people wandering around, and I guess just the works really. Now, I'd actually been here on 2 occasions before. One was when I drove out with one of my friends, but to be honest, it was just the biggest waste of time. I mean, literally nothing happened. We were driving for a long time to get there, and basically nothing happened. We just get bored and come back. So I wasn't expecting too much in the second time that I'd been there. Again, nothing had happened, but in more recent times, I'd moved much closer and thought, why not go? Also, there was quite a nice snowfall, so I thought this was pretty cool. I really like going on adventures at night time like this, especially when the elements are involved. For whatever reason, it kind of makes me feel almost like I'm in a movie, especially if I've got my AirPods with me and I just listen to songs, and it really creates a vibe. I always found it empowering, but yeah. So I set out at night and I walked towards the forest off of the main path, and it's really dark. The stars are looking absolutely beautiful above me, and luckily there's no cars coming, so I just get off and straight into where the forest starts. There was probably about 30 meters of snow or whatnot before it actually starts. Then you've hit by lots of trees. Now I turn my flashlight on and suddenly I can see really well. I had a really powerful one that was actually adapted for cameras and stuff. I was actually joking with one of my friends, it's like turning on the daytime and there's nothing to be scared of. And I also said that this probably scares away the spirits more than anything. They probably think it's God. I think of these jokes as I can see my breath in front of me from the cold. Now, it's kind of like the snow that's falling quite quickly to the ground, almost like it's kind of sleep, but it's not. It's still snowing. I notice it as I take my first steps into the forest. I have some pretty skinny trees on either side of me when I see something that looks odd. I can see what appears to be a white silhouette to my left when suddenly it vanishes. I'm a little confused by this, but suddenly I realise that it must be my breath from where I've got my scarf and things. I think it's a little odd, and I tell myself just to relax a bit, and I keep walking. The trees are kind of like overarching here, and it actually looks really beautiful. I do notice one odd thing. There seems to be footprints that lead off from the main trail, but they kind of look like hoof shapes. I thought maybe some kind of animal went through here, or God knows what. It couldn't have been horse riding because the branches are actually too low. To give you an idea, they're probably about 8 feet above me or dropping down to 5, so you'd have to duck sometimes. Now these aren't nice branches too. They're the kinds that come snagged on each other, and if you make one loose, it's going to kind of whip you in the face. And I didn't want to lose my eyes. But it wasn't too much of an issue really. So when I set off, I didn't really have a direction or place that I wanted to go to. I heard there was an old church that used to be here, and I thought, you know what, that would be pretty cool if I can find that. Who knows what would happen if I go there on my own. Now at the time, I was certain no other people around because I literally can't hear anything or see anyone. A really good telling sign is the fact that there's no lights. You kind of need lights to see where you're going out here, but I literally couldn't see any. Every so often, I look off into the woods and I don't see anything. I did notice one or two strange sounds, but they didn't happen too frequently. I know that there's lots of animals out here because of my normal line of work, and just I guess from having some good sense about my surroundings, so I didn't let it put me off. I knew I had to be careful of certain animals out here because I guess some could hunt at night, but I was going to be far bigger and they wouldn't dare go to me. The sky almost looks like a beautiful orangey colour above me because of my torch, and I think that's really pretty. I do start to feel the cold a bit now, so decide to pick up the pace. Another interesting thing is there's lots and lots of footprints on this path which have been here earlier, and I think that's a little bit bizarre because usually people don't come here too often. I'm very used to going out here and there's no one around, so that was interesting. As I'm walking, the snow's now going directly into my face, and it actually made it a bit annoying, to be honest. I stopped for a moment to try and figure out the direction of it so I can try and avoid it when I hear a howling off. Now I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but there seems to be another little trail where you can cut through going off of the main path, but I decide not to follow it just in case. I was kind of expecting to run into some crazy dog walker or something, but they never showed up, so I think this is a little bit odd. Eventually I come up to one of the trail signs and I can see some of the wildlife that lives here, and I think to myself, well, there's definitely nothing that's going to hunt me, as it's just birds and things like that. But I do wonder what the sound is that I heard. Now, I go a little bit further along and eventually the snow picks up even more now. It felt a little bit different and almost like the weather had become more hostile now. Again, I'm not a spiritual person, but it almost started to feel a bit more like the air was different here. Now, the only way I can describe what I was seeing if you haven't been in the woods at night in the snow is everything sort of looks like an infinite dream. It's almost like somebody's made an unlimited map of just forest, snow, woods, and it's just going to keep on going forever. You do have to be careful out here though, because if you really go off the path, then you don't want to be stuck out in the cold like this. As you can imagine, trying to get a fire going is not easy at the best of times, let alone here. As I'm thinking of this, I hear sounds up above again. I can hear somebody scurrying through the tree line. Well, at least that's what I think it is. And I pause for a second, and I go to switch my flashlight with one that has more of a focus beam. And I kid you not, as this is happening, I can see what appears to be a really small kind of lanky armed person scurrying through the woods, and I take a moment to figure out what this is. I quickly flicker on my other light, which is more powerful, and I don't see anything, so I just put it down to my mind going a little bit loose. I do have to say, I've never seen anything like this, and I think this is really weird. Annoyingly, my eyes didn't adjust well enough in the darkness to actually see this thing, and I have tried telling this part to some other people, but again, they all just say, oh yeah, it's just a rabbit. But I mean, come on, I've seen rabbits, and this thing had lanky arms. I can only describe it as if a person was about 3 feet tall, had a very large torso, and very long skinny arms that dragged the floor. But I don't know where they've gone. I tried looking around for more footprints, but I can't see anything, and this gives me a little bit of adrenaline to pick up the pace. I knew I'd gone out here hoping to find some ghosts and things, but now I wasn't so sure if I actually wanted to find them or not. Now again, I can see a mist form just in front of me, then slowly disappear again. It was a white mist, and it's really like somebody's just breathed in front of me and then vanished. I try and replicate how I was standing a few moments ago and pace backwards and start breathing more heavily to see if it was me, but there's nothing there. Pretty confused at this point, but I decided to just pick up the pace more. Now, I had one other scary experience before from being out in the woods I can think of now, but this was more to do with an animal than anything supernatural. I remember I'd gone somewhere and a big old moose appeared, and it was extremely close to me. For whatever reason, it didn't really take notice of me, it just looked at me for a second, but I remember that scared me. But that feeling that I had was kind of beginning to loom over me, and I started to wonder if maybe there was a large animal like that around. Now this is when I noticed the first strange structure. It's something that I hadn't realised before. It's a large wooden structure that looks like 3 trees, kind of in a Stonehenge shape, but a little bit less spread out. This is really weird. It's like they've been carved by hand and placed upright. And what was really bizarre is that there isn't much snow in the middle. It seems like the ground is staying particularly dry here, and not snow forming. Now, I think this is really bizarre because, well, where I am there shouldn't be anything like this. I would have been aware of it too, and I don't understand why I'd never noticed it before. It now becomes apparent that I'm not actually on the main path. I switch off my flashlight once more, and I just take a few seconds to take in everything. I'm trying to give my eyes some time to adjust to the darkness, and I look down at my battery. It's dropped down to 40% on the main flashlight thing, and that's a bit of a worry. Batteries drain pretty quick in the cold, and now I notice that there's more of the mist forming up ahead of me. I actually take a second just to assess what this actually is, but I can't figure out what it is. It's almost like a group of people standing there, kind of just like breathing or talking normally, but there's no one around, and it only seems to be spawning in a specific spot. Now, I once more get closer and try and figure out what this is, but I just can't. Now, it reminds me of a story of what one of my other Fire Ranger friends had told me about. Sorry to go off topic, but I think it's important because it might have been linked to what I saw. Now, one of my good friends had been working in the service for quite a number of years, and he would always try and prank us and pretend there was scary things out there. We never believed him, and sometimes he would actually get us with Halloween masks and stuff, and that was pretty creepy. But I remember one day that he come up to us and he looked very freaked out. He said, "Guys, I saw something and I don't know what it is." We ask him to elaborate, and he refuses for a while, but because I'm good friends with him, eventually he decides to tell me what he saw. Apparently, he thought he saw a fire, so he went over to investigate it. Apparently it was just a small red cherry glow, but that could be the start of something. Just as he got to where it was, it suddenly went out, and there was a very big mist that appeared, which is like a smoky white colour. It almost looked like there was a huge fire in terms of the amount of smoke, but nothing was burning. He said it stayed here for literally 3 or 4 minutes as he stared at this bewildered, until eventually it just vanishes. Now the reason that I'm telling you this is because it was incredibly similar to what I saw in terms of how he described it, the way that it moved, the slight opaqueness of it, everything was just weird. I stood there for what must have been about a good 4 minutes before eventually I decided that, yeah, I'm probably gonna have to press through this now. I couldn't be waiting around here all day, and I decided to be brave and walk through it. I actually held my breath just before I did so because I didn't know if it was maybe some kind of dangerous chemical or something that had leaked out, but there wasn't anything. I eventually make it through after what felt like ages, to be honest, and I was actually gasping for breath. It probably took me a good 20 seconds to get through this. Eventually when I do, I turn around to try and figure out where it had gone, and I can't see it. I do think that I can see something just moving off into the distance, but I can't be sure. It was almost like a group of people had vanished, but one of them had just went off into the woods. Now, I'm a little bit freaked out, but again, I was here alone, so there's not really too much I can think of this. Now I do notice something else very weird. There seems to be lots of really bizarre shaped footprints going off in different directions. They're all kind of like the hoof shaped, like the thing I'd seen earlier, but they're really far spread apart, like something quite tall had been walking. But it's walking as though that it's in complete arrogance to the trees that are there, like they don't exist, and again, I don't know what kind of animal could have done this. Now I walk on. I haven't really got a direction this time. I just know that I need to keep going. I have a feeling that I'm in a bad spot, and that's when I see something. This time I was certain that I was seeing something that was actually there. It was very far away, but I can only describe this as something which is completely black, with these white tusk arm things that was about 4 feet tall that hops around. I only saw this for a couple of seconds and it vanishes, but it's probably the scariest part of the encounter for me. I don't want to describe it as like a demonic thing because again I'm not spiritual, but I don't really know what this was. It's like a really weird creature that would stand awkwardly and almost like it was just bent out too far and shouldn't be balanced, but it was. I flash on both the lights at the same time searching for it, but again I don't see anything. I then realise that I'm not too far from a lake that I'm actually familiar with, and that's when I noticed a strange glow coming from the other side of it. Now, it was kind of like a glow of like a power plant would give, I guess, in the horizon. Almost like heat waves of light just emanating out slowly, again in the white colour, but almost having more of an energy to it. I decide that I have to investigate. Now I was actually stupidly close to the shoreline now, because one slip, one twisted ankle and I could go through the ice and no one would get me here. I'd die of hypothermia before rescuers could find me, but the sense of adventure had taken over. I turn my light around again and I can't see anything. For a second I'm sure I can make out the faint glow of 2 eyes, but I don't know if this is just an animal, so I'm not too worried. There's also strange sounds coming from over where that the light is, and it's almost like lots of people talking played backwards, really far off, really far, like barely audible, but I could hear it. The forest was pretty quiet at this time, and I think it made it worse. I'm constantly flashing around with my lights, trying to just get whatever this is to show up more, but I can't see anything. Now, I know some people are asking me why wasn't I more scared of that weird thing I'd seen, and to be honest, I can't tell you that. It was almost like I was drawn into something, and a mixed personality had taken over where I was seeing weird things and they weren't welcoming, but they weren't worrying for whatever reason, like I had to go on further. I decided that I need to keep up my pace now, but I have some pretty good thoughts and I think, well, I don't want to fall in the water and die, so I go off now. At this part, the trees are a lot thicker than before, and that was a bit more reassuring. But that lake, I'm constantly hearing sounds from over where that lake is, and I just cannot for the life of me figure out what they are. I actually can't remember the sounds too well, and I don't know if it was because I was in a bit of a heightened state during the experience, but I just remember they were weird sounds, like scratching and things like that. Now I know it could have easily been a group of people on drugs or God knows what, but given the weather conditions, I think that's extremely unlikely. Again, this is something one of my incredible colleagues told me that that's what this could have been, and joking that it was green men and aliens, but I don't understand it, because again, these people are so interested to hear what I was saying, and maybe they're denying it because they're scared of what I'm telling them, or just refuse to believe it, but that annoyed me. And I've always been somebody who has the ability to break down the physics of things. If something has happened, I don't immediately go to the irrational explanation. I think with a scientific mind, but it failed me this day, because I can't come up with much for what was happening to me. Now I continue on as the snow gets a little bit thicker now. I think the reason for this might have been because there weren't as many thin trees blocking out all of the snow to capture it, just quite a few big ones with more space in between, but it did actually make my legs hurt. I noticed my knees are quite cold, so my remedy for this is once again to pick up the pace. I clear some of the snow that's actually settled on me, and I actually feel a bit better now. There's quite a big drop off down to the lake now, and I realise that I'm going uphill. What was weird though is that I haven't been to this area before, and I can't really find it. Even since I've been back to the forest again, I've never been able to find this exact spot. Now, it was like somebody had described the area that I was in to somebody else, and they'd tried to make it but not done it exactly the same, and you kind of know deep down that you're not in exactly the same place, but there's enough familiarity for you to feel confident in the situation. Now, as I get closer to the light that I could see, I realised that this definitely isn't the moonlight, because it was kind of flickering like it had an electrical energy to it, and was kind of flashing around into the clouds a little bit, not like lightning, but kind of like the northern lights, and that was what I find really bizarre. Just the whole energy of whatever this was is like nothing that I've ever seen before. A little bit scared now, I start to slowly pan around trying to see anything, but I can't find a thing. Every so often I hear sounds of movement behind me, but I can't be sure what this is. I decide that I just need to keep it moving, and that was one of the things that made me feel more safe in this situation now. I eventually come up onto the bend and I start approaching towards where the light is directly now. Now again, I'm not too scared or shy of adventures, so I have to keep pressing forward one step at a time. I do notice something odd, and that's that there aren't any steps up here. I know people might not have gone here in the daytime, but it does seem weird because there was just so many earlier that I'd seen pretty much everywhere. The snow had actually slowed down a little bit and it wasn't as abrasive on my face, and this was quite nice. My nose and toes always seem to suffer, especially in the cold, along with my hands. I think I have a problem where they don't have very good blood, or they just seem to switch off in the cold, but it made the going a little bit tough and less comfortable. Now, had I found the ghost that I was looking for? Not just yet. So I decide that I need to go towards the light, but again, the way that the light is kind of bouncing off the clouds, almost like it's the northern lights, was just really strange. I was incredibly drawn into this, almost like I was looking at a hypnotist watch. It was incredibly beautiful, but just really weird. I didn't know if it was related to an electrical storm, but it wouldn't really make sense for me. I have seen something bizarre while working on the service, so again, a little bit similar to this. I remembered one time that I was working. I was actually in the station and I just made myself a coffee. I went to step outside and had a look around at the sky at night just because it's so beautiful, and I do notice something odd. There's almost like a large blue electrical ball of light in the sky. It's opaque and not really visible, and it only lasted for a few seconds, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. A few of my colleagues had actually reported seeing it as well while on duty at the exact same time that I did, and this kind of had the same characteristics, but it wasn't identical. But I want to find out what this is, and I wasn't as scared as I was before. Now the closer I get, there's something else I notice which is pretty bizarre, and that's that the sky seems to be kind of imitating this very loosely. It's almost like somebody turned on a pulse of electricity through the clouds above me. It's almost like the northern lights are above the whole sky now, but extremely faint, but the same colour as the clouds, so again it's almost like they were pulsating a bit. I did get scared because there's an eye condition that someone in my family has, which is actually a little bit similar to this, but I've been tested for it multiple times since and after this event, and it's always come up clear. But in the moment I was pretty scared because I really worry about having issues with my vision. Now, luckily it turned out it wasn't my eyes, and I quickly did some tests by looking at the ground and things that weren't moving to realise that nothing was off. But why was the sky moving? I wasn't so sure what was happening, but I wasn't that far away now from where I needed to be. That's when I noticed another wooden structure. It's similar to what I've seen before, but it kind of formed more of a hexagon type of shape. Every so often I would see these on either sides of the trail, and they seemed to be increasing in frequency as I got closer to the light. I only saw about 3 more of them, but again, never seen it since. I stop for a moment, and I can see my breath on my light as I take my mask down just to try and get a better feel of what was happening. I shine the torch around, but again, I don't see much of anything. Don't know what I was expecting to see. I've just got the glow dead ahead of me now, and I know I have to get there. It's not much longer now before I'm there, so at least I've got that to look forward to, and I can eventually start heading back. I'm not sure how far I'd actually come at this point, but I've probably been walking for about a good 50 or 60 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but usually you'll feel it more than I was in this situation, because walking in the snow is actually really difficult sometimes, and the cold can kind of zap out all of your energy. Now, I'm not too far away from where this is, and I can hear the voices again. It sounds like whispering. I can make out the odd word or two, but nothing seems to be in a language that I understand. It's definitely in a language though, and it hasn't increased in volume or anything since when I first heard it earlier. I don't know if it was there the whole time because I kind of just zoned out to it, but I suddenly noticed it much more than I had done earlier. And again, this is pretty weird to me because, like I said, I've never heard anything like it, and it is a bit creepy. Now, I eventually come up to the last clearing where the light should be, and I'm quite excited to get here. There seems to be lots of footsteps here everywhere, so I'm pretty convinced that I've made it back onto the main path now. I've got a good feeling now, and I know that there must be somebody there, so I feel pretty happy. So, what do? Take my steps around it. I can definitely hear the voices on the right side of me now, and I keep stopping every couple of seconds to approximate exactly where it is. Every so often I see movement up ahead of me, and I'm convinced that it's people out here now, so I feel much more relaxed and reassured. I'm now going down the last straight part that I have to go to, with the trees kind of forming an arch above me, and the snow still everywhere around me. Now some people have asked me why did I keep going and what was I actually doing out there. That was my friends at work earlier, and I don't know. I guess it kind of felt like I'd been there for too long and I was at least going to get something out of it, and yeah. So I continue up and I eventually find where the clearing is, and I realise that I've only got about another 20 feet of a walk to figure out what this is, and I can see movement again. I decide that the best thing to do in this situation is just to slowly sneak up on who or whatever it is up ahead of me. Now yes, I've got them, I think. I can see some more lights ahead too. I see 2, then 3, then they go out. I don't have my light on at this point because I want the element of surprise. The snow is coming against me, but not directly in my face, so this is pretty pleasant. Now, I come up to where I can hear the voices finally getting louder and louder, and my excitement is growing. It feels like I've been here for too long trying to figure out what is actually going on, and I'm gonna get my taste of it soon. I am kind of looking over my shoulder every so often though, because I do hear sounds like I'm being followed. Again, I keep thinking I'm seeing movement, but there's not much of anything when I focus, so I try not to think of it. I don't actually have my torch on now, so I can't verify the fact that there's nothing there. But again, I just presumed it was people. And I thought, well, they haven't said anything to me, and I'm not disturbing them, so why are they going to be annoyed at me? It was almost like an overconfidence, and eventually, I come up to the tree line and the clearing. I start going a lot slower now as I get closer and closer to where I can hear them all. Now the chanting is still illegible, and I take my first step up, and I look around and I can see what must be hundreds of people all standing around the edge of some kind of clearing. They've all got their hands raised up and they're making some weird chanting sound. Now they're not actually that close to me, so it's pretty difficult to make out how tall they are, but these things seem really small. I say things because I don't know if they were people unless they were on their knees, but that's what it looked like. I start to shake a little bit as I feel a lot more like I'm in danger now. I decide that I'm gonna slowly turn my flashlight on for a second and figure out what this actually is. My eyes adjust more and more to the darkness every couple of seconds, and I notice something wrong. They don't look like normal people. The shape of them's all wrong and their arms are too long, and they're all either wearing some white things on their arms, but it looks very pointy, just like the things I'd seen earlier. I try as best I can to slowly flicker on the torch, but I cannot do it. Again, I start shaking more and more and try and press it, but nothing happens. I keep on and on flicking until eventually it flashes on, and for a split second I can see these things. They're like very dark small creatures with weird pointy arms, all facing up to the sky making some weird sounds. Their mouths are what really scare me. It's like just a circle with lots of jagged teeth. And just as I'm taking this all in, they suddenly vanish, and so does the sounds. I quickly fire the torch around everywhere trying to see where they've gone, but I can't see anything. I can hear my heartbeat in my ears like a constant rhythmic drum. And then, a few moments later, I hear movement, rustling and the sounds as though hundreds of people are all coming towards me suddenly. and I take off. I turn my torch on and quickly dart up ahead of myself, constantly looking over my shoulder with the torch. What I have just seen, I don't know, but I knew that I was in danger and had to get out of there. Luckily, I can retrace my footprints for most of the journey until I get away from the clearing. I can hear the sounds are still coming after me, just much slower than me, but they're still coming. I stop for a second and fire the torch around everywhere but can't see anything, and I drop it. Now, I managed to drop it not only into the snow, but face first, and that also means there's no light illuminating back at me, it's kind of buried. Just as I say to myself, you've got to be kidding me, I can hear something else not far up ahead of me. So I take off. Thank God I actually brought the other torch with me, because I'm absolutely certain at the fact that I would have had cardiac arrest otherwise. Now, the only problem I've got is the other torch isn't that easily accessible right now. I put it away when I was trying to hide and be not heard, but now I'm starting to think that wasn't really a good idea. And because I've had this on and so close to my face, I haven't really adjusted to the dark, and I don't know where I'm going. I used to be quite good at long distance cross country, so I have that in my favour, but I soon realise those years are way behind me, and I come up to a point where there's two paths. One's much smaller and seems untrodden but should be closer to where I need to get to. The other is what seems to be closer to where the light is, and I have to choose the latter. Now I take off down this path, and I keep fumbling trying to get the other torch on, but for whatever reason I just can't seem to do it. I don't know if it was for the fact that it was in the cold for too long, but in those moments it just would not come back to life again, and I'm just hitting it on my palm constantly. Now it's extremely difficult to navigate in this moment. I think I know where I'm going, but I can't really tell. There's clearly lots and lots of different footprints on this path, and I can't tell if they're normal or not because I was rushing so much, but it gives me some reassurance that I must be going in a relatively good direction to escape whatever this is. Now I should mention at this point that the sounds are long gone. I'd absolutely blitzed something that seemed like it couldn't go much quicker than a light walking pace, but it didn't matter. I don't know what was chasing me or why. I don't know what I'd just disturbed. Eventually, I flick my torch on again, and I illuminate the rest of the way back. I turn it off again quickly because I'm not sure how good the battery is and I really needed to conserve it. I stop for a few moments to collect my breath and look around me, and I think I know my bearings now, and I start to walk. The only reason that I had to walk now is because I was so out of breath and exhausted from moving in the snow that I genuinely was going to have to crawl the rest of the way out otherwise. I now make it up to another clearing where I can see the lake. I look around everywhere, and what's really weird, I can't see the light glow that I saw earlier. It's genuinely nowhere. I was convinced that I should still at least be able to see that out of all things, but there's literally nothing. I don't get it. And the sky, it still didn't look right, but it wasn't like before. So where did the light go? I didn't have much time to focus on it, but I was truly perplexed, and this is something that I still think about now. I managed to get my torch on again, and I don't know, it sounds stupid, but I was trying to recharge whatever energy it was and fire it around everywhere, hoping to see the light again, just to know it was there. But again, I don't see anything. Now, I'm pretty spooked out now, but I have to keep going. I eventually make it into a more familiar area, and I'm actually feeling confident finally. I've adopted more of a walking pace because I was a little bit worried that if anyone was out there and I ran up on them, they might think I was trying to attack them. I do stop constantly though, and look around, desperately trying to see something or anything around me, but again, I can't see anything or anyone. I was desperately hoping that I'd see a group of people just to explain what I'd seen, or at least to be able to tell somebody, but I can't see anything. The snow's picked up a little bit more now, and it wasn't pleasant. I realised too that I must have been out of here for quite a long while because the battery is virtually entirely drained on the torch. I know because it's gone pretty dim. I probably have the worst torch in the world because when the battery's low it goes really dim to conserve it, but it doesn't last very long, so what's the point? The other light that I have is far superior, but that's long gone. I decide to leave it for whatever's out there to enjoy it. I know I'm never seeing that thing again. I'm someone who usually hates losing things too, but I was so scared I didn't even think about trying to recover it. Now, the trees are getting thinner and thinner, and that gives me a pretty good idea that I'm not too far away from where I need to be now. I can't be 100% certain that I'm back to safety, but this is a pretty good indicator of it being the case. Now, I continue this walking pace and I'm constantly looking behind myself. Now momentarily, I start shaking again and don't know why. Then suddenly, I realise I hear something making a screeching sound. It's kind of at a medium volume, but it sounds like it's coming from exactly behind where I was. I'm not so worried now because with a few steps, I'm eventually back to where the forest ends and I'm not too far from safety. I look around for anything to have been following me, but I can't see anything. And I quickly make my way over to my car. I start it up, turn the lights on full, and take one last look into the forest and I can't see anything. I get back into my car and drive the rest of the way home, completely in shock about the whole experience. Now, I really don't know what happened to me that day, and I truly don't like sharing my story with colleagues at work because they don't really listen to me, but I know what I saw, and I don't know what it was. It could have been spiritual, it could have been anything, but I sure as hell don't have a clue what that was, and that scares me. I was homeless from 98 to 2004. I lived in the woods in several different areas in Washington state. I was a Boy Scout when I was younger, and my father showed me how to live off of the land. I was one of the only people I knew at the time that actually had a real camp. I wasn't one of those sleeping bag in the ditch at the side of the road people. I knew how to make a fire in the dead of winter when everything's covered in snow. I've seen strange things over the years, but one particular event stuck with me. It happened in 1999. The first incident occurred in June. I was camping in some woods about 2 miles out of town in Everett, Washington. I had 2 friends who also camped with me, Greg and Jim. Greg was into a lot of the same things that I liked, and we spoke all the time about paranormal and UFOs. Greg decides to walk to the grocery store to get some snacks that he missed when this happened. It's around 5 PM and me and Jim are just hanging out at a camp enjoying a beer. I was sitting in my tent and Jim was standing to the left of the tent. Jim spotted something and started pointing outside at the woods, saying there's something there in the clearing. I couldn't see it from where I was, but I can see roughly where he's pointing. In the clearing hovered what I can only describe as an illuminated diamond. It was shaped just like one that you'd see in a jewelry store or magazine. It pulsated colours that changed from red to yellow to fiery orange and made no sound. It had no visible propulsion. I saw no windows or landing gears. It doesn't look metallic. I would say it kind of looked like it was made out of glass, because I don't know how else to describe its appearance. It sat hovering over the ground about 30 feet in the air. Not long after I saw it and realised that it must have been something odd, 3 black unmarked helicopters actually flew over us. They come out of nowhere. They were flying side by side, one in the middle turning on some kind of light that was under the cockpit and started circling around the UFO. I would say they did this 4 or 5 times before turning around and flying back. Jim kept saying, "This can't be real, it's a UFO," over and over again. I think what he saw shattered his reality. The guy didn't believe in UFOs at all. He was the same kind of person who made fun of others who believed in that kind of thing. The object started to move slowly. It moves from right in a straight line, and then changes direction and moves to the left in a straight line. It did this, I think, maybe 3 times. It then vanishes in a golden streak of light. The temperature in the woods drops all of a sudden, and our teeth start chattering. Jim grabbed his pack and booked. Now, I stayed when Greg came back, and I told him what we saw, and he said, "Oh man, I wish I saw it." I stayed in that spot for a couple more days before deciding to move my camp further into the woods. For some reason, seeing that UFO didn't affect me the way it did Jim. He was hiding out somewhere and no one could find him. When you did run into the guy, he would make lame excuses as to why he didn't go. He did this to me and Greg several times until I never saw him again. Now flash forward to August. I was camping alone. Greg was living at his girlfriend's apartment. I'd basically just gotten back to my camp from walking down to town to get a shower and something to eat. I was wide awake. It was starting to get dark, but there was enough light to see through the trees. My camp sat near the edge of the woods next to a guy's house. The gentleman whose house it was owned a dog. I knew this because I cut through his backyard one night and the dog's barking at me. I was sitting in my tent with the front window unzipped, reading a book by a flashlight. I've always had a very good hearing. I could hear what sounded like somebody trying to creep up on my camp down a path. Now, I figured it's probably a neighbour's kid or something trying to spook me. I could then hear what sounded like fabric running together, like pant legs from somebody walking towards me. I really wasn't too sure what to make of this. So I wait for them silently as they move closer towards where I am. I guess my plan was to jump out of my tent and catch them in the act so they're scared and run off. That's not exactly what happened, to put it lightly. What I saw was the most frightening thing I've ever seen. I see the silhouette of a 10 to 12 foot tall thin being. It had a thin neck with a large bulbous head. There didn't appear to be any hair on its head. It hunched forward as it walks. Its arms were so long as its hands hung below where a normal person would have their knees. It walked in big strides. It made no noises as it moved. It went from the right side of my camp to the left and I was freaked out. I remembered thinking, what the heck? I quickly jump out of my tent and start to shine my flashlight around, trying to spot this thing. It was nowhere to be seen. I guess I must have made it go into what they call fight or flight, because this thing knew I was ready to fight it off, I guess. But it simply disappeared. The woods were dead silent, no crickets. The neighbour's dog wasn't barking, which is weird. I knew I saw something, but it appeared to have gone and didn't come back. I go back into my tent and shrugged it off. I'm not sure why I did this, and I went back to reading my book. I couldn't concentrate on the words though. I become very tired suddenly, as if I'd been put under a sleeping spell. Now, I couldn't keep my eyes on this, no matter how hard I thought of it. I lay down and have my pocket knife next to me for protection. I say I'm gonna stay up and listen. I ended up passing out before not too long, and I hear what sounded like little people rushing towards my tent on all fours. I woke up the next morning feeling like I've had the best sleep ever. I can't explain it, but I moved my camp not too far after this, as I gave what happened to be more of a weird situation. I kind of realised that I was probably abducted. I don't have any memories of being taken or anything. It just makes more sense that way. The event frightened me so bad that for years I was afraid to be alone, especially at night. I locked all my doors and windows before going to bed. I didn't even like it when I'm in the shower on my own and have to close my eyes. I get this anticipation and feeling of dread, like I'm gonna be snatched when I'm not paying attention. I've had insomnia for years. I've gotten better now, but only ever get like 3 or so hours of sleep. Sometimes I hear what sounds like movements at night, and I just lay in bed listening. Nothing usually happens, but sometimes I think I see shadow people. I don't know what happened to me that night out in the woods, but the thing I saw, It wasn't human or animal. I'll never forget it. Now, for some more information, it was about 8 years later that I had an encounter with two MIBs while taking two people through the woods. I was at the local homeless shelter talking to my friend Ryan about the being I saw in the woods. Then a guy who we don't know walked up and says, "Can he talk to us?" I said sure. He told us his name and that he was in the army out of Utah. We asked him why he was out in Washington and he said, well, the army breached his contract so he moved. Apparently, this guy and his brother were both enlisted and would take hikes up there, and they accidentally discovered the entrance of a base or something. They were immediately surrounded by rifles and stuff. They were taken into the base and interrogated. They were given some kind of injection or something that he thought was truth serum. His brother forgot about what happened, but somehow he retained his memory. He said when he got home into his local barracks, he resigned. When he started driving to Washington, he noticed that he's being followed apparently. He looks to the front plate to try and figure out the number, but it's fuzzy. It was like it was being blurred out. He then saw the driver stick an arm out of the window and he felt a thump on his van. Apparently it was a state officer, also there at the same time. He got out of the van, and they get out too. He said there it was seized, and he then traded the van with a compact one to continue on his way. He said he never saw the dark sedan or cop again. I asked him if he saw anything in the woods, but he said he didn't see anything. Now, we're basically going through the woods, and suddenly Ryan said stop and points behind us. Behind us at the intersection were two white males wearing black suits. They both had on black sunglasses, and the one on the right waves to us. We ran into the woods and cut through to the other side. We saw some kind of green beam that was pointing towards where we're standing. The guy from Utah said that he recognized it. Now we ran for miles to get away from them. I guess we got away because none of them actually saw where we were going. One night about 10 years ago, me and my best friend decided to go stop by a local hangout in ours in Bowie, MD, to smoke a cigarette before he dropped me off at home. We grew up here and spent our early years wandering the trail and the woods and whatnot, just drinking. So this one spot is on a railroad overpass at 450 and 197. There's a parking lot and a small area of grass with trees, about a 30 feet strip of land separating the track and the lot. So it's night time and we decide to go there to have a smoke. We go on the tracks and we're facing the parking lot, so the overpass is to our left and we got the tracks on our right. This way, we're still barely in the glow, but we got some light. Now we're smoking and he's talking, but the entire time I'm focused to my right, peering down this track because I have a weird feeling. I actually didn't figure out what it was until later, and it's a feeling of being watched by something. I've never had this. About 2 minutes in, we're almost done and a helicopter comes above us, seemingly at tree level, with the spotlight briefly going right over us and then the direction of the overpass. Not 5 seconds later, I hear the gravel shift from between the tracks and I look to the overpass. Standing there is the silhouette of this giant thing. Now since it's dark and it's under an overpass, I only see the silhouette, but it's 8 feet tall or 9, and kind of blurry looking. It appears like its head is attached to its torso, completely bypassing any semblance of a neck. Now, it was huge, and we only looked at it for a couple of seconds before I said, let's go now. We got out of there hurriedly, rushing away, and we hear the gravel move closer. Not 3 seconds later, we both hear the most demonic, horrifying, multiple pitch scream which is right above our heads. It came from no more than a foot behind us, so of course we book it to the car, and no, we didn't look back because it was terrifying. We get to the car, and weirdly, My mate has his lanyard stuck around the wheel, and we have to pull it off for a while before we can actually move. Anyway, we get driving around for only an hour before we can speak and say, "What was that?" Hey guys, I have another story for you all. This one is unexplained / an encounter and a bit of a long one. About 6 years ago, over the summer of my junior year, going into my senior year of high school, I experienced something that I can't quite shake off to this day. My parents and friends' parents were going out of town for the weekend, so myself and 3 others planned a sleepover so we can all hang out, be as loud as we want, etc. We slept over at my friend's house. His house is located on the east side of town where there's a small wooded area. Now that night, we all mentioned how that we could sleep on the trampoline. Apparently it's warm at night, and none of us have done it before. Now, the guy who owns here is actually a little bit concerned, because apparently there's homeless people, and sometimes deers wander out of nowhere. Basically, his house is in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forests, and there's no fences separating us from the woods, so literally, anything can just go into his yard, and vice versa. I told him that we're going to be fine and there's nothing to worry about, but boy did I wish I could go back on that statement. We started setting up our spots on the tramp, getting cozy and just hanging out, looking at our phones. About an hour into this, I start to hear twigs snapping and leaves crunching. Matt was the only one who wasn't on the trampoline, but sitting on a small river donut on the deck next to the tramp. I was looking at Matt while all of this was happening, and he was looking into the woods. He didn't say anything other than a quiet, "I told you this is a bad idea." I kept listening for a few minutes and then it stopped. My friends were all listening too. They didn't seem concerned. It was really quiet after it stopped and none of us said a thing. We all looked back on our phones and that's when we saw it. The second my eyes met my phone, I saw from my peripheral vision this 7 or 8 feet tall thing running out of the woods into the backyard and dart into the side of the home. We all saw the silhouette of whatever this thing was. It was almost ghostly. It was extremely slim and bipedal. Here's the weird thing though, we saw it run, but it made 0 sound while doing so. But it made the motion as if somebody was running. When we saw this, we all did the exact same thing, screamed and ran off the trampoline. Matt was the first one inside. I'm surprised that he can even run, let alone walk, because of his injury. We left some blankets and pillows outside because we were in such a hurry. We shut the door and sliding door and lock it. All of the windows are also closed. We kept looking outside of the windows trying to find something, but there was nothing. Because we're so startled, we actually stayed up until sunrise. Now, I think about what happened on an almost daily basis. Everyone I've told the story to says that, well, maybe it was a skinwalker or something, but I'm really not sure. It's crazy to think of. Now this happened while I was driving in the woods years ago. It was a pretty familiar area. To this day I can actually go to the exact spot it happened. It was summer and I was driving a convertible so the top was down. Maybe somewhere around 2 AM-ish. It was a very clear night, but it had stormed earlier. On the horizon on the right side of my car, I see the flashes of amber light in the distance. At first I thought it was an emergency vehicle, but I knew the area very well. There were no roads where the lights were coming from, nothing but woods for miles and miles. In fact, I crashed the car trying to figure out the lights almost. There was a tree down in the road that I almost hit from the storm earlier. I have to stop the car and turn around. It's a 2-lane road with lights nearby. But these eventually fade off. There's now nothing but starlights and my headlights. I turn the car around in the middle of the road with my headlights on. I guess whatever it was suddenly appears about 8 feet tall. At least that's my best guess as to what happened. Now I stop the car, Why I did so I can't tell you, I don't know, but I did. I shut off the lights, and this thing, definitely humanoid not human, had some kind of luminescence about it. Its skin glowed a dull white light. The thing starts to move towards the car, making weird sounds and moans. It sounds very hoarse too. As it got closer, I could only make out its features. I couldn't believe what was happening. Again, it's very tall and thin. I remembered thinking that if it was human it would have starved to death long ago. Its arms were out of proportion, as was its neck. They were abnormally long. Its arms were nearly to its knees. It had wrinkled, worn, leathery looking skin, which was the purest white I've ever seen. The wrinkles of its skin made it look impossibly old. It folded over itself, and again, the best way I can describe it is like looking into some combination of maggot, birch bark, and wet newspaper. Like, if you cut your finger and wear a bandage way too long, then you take it off and the skin is all stickly and white and wrinkled, but that everywhere. The closer it got, the more I could see. Its eyes, or apparent lack thereof, they just looked like large, deep, dark holes. Its mouth was crooked and way too wide. If it had ears, the corners of the mouth would be right up to them. The moaning and limping and shuffling sounds were horrible. I then start my car and get out of there and probably drove about 90 all the way home. In hindsight, I regret leaving. I had the strong impression after the fact that the thing was actually sick or injured or dying. It didn't look well, but whatever it was, I think it only wanted help. Now, I was young at the time of this, but it was so strange I can still remember it so vividly. My family was looking at moving into another home, and we were looking at a house with a large backyard with woods behind it. My older sister and I had our own stuff and went to the back near the woods. I was looking in the woods when I saw a tall white, slow-moving blur. I was looking directly at it, yet it was so blurry and unfocused that it was basically a formless blob. I look at my sister, and she told me that we had to run, so we actually ran all the way back to our home and to our parents. I've never been able to find anything similar online though, and I still don't know what this was. To get to the point, today around 5 PM on the west coast of Sweden, me and my dad went for a walk in a forest maybe 10 minutes from civilization without any lights. There's trails without street lights. Now, we saw the trail fairly clearly. We often take walks together and were talking about something mundane. We were right next to a lake and we noticed a big group of maybe 50 ducks just chilling in the water close to the beach. Then out of nowhere, maybe 50 feet in front of us, a creature ran across from the trail, right to left, then continues down, quickly disappearing out of sight. I'd say it was about 150 cm tall, on 4 legs, beige or brown colour. Really fast, made no noise except for the sounds of running. All the ducks in the lake freak out and start flying and screaming, which feels like weird behaviour. I mean, they've seen deers go past and not flinch before, but why this? There's also a heavy smell of blood or iron permeating the air. Both of us can smell it. I've never experienced a smell like this before, and I work in a hospital, so I'm used to blood. Personally, I'm fascinated by these kinds of things, so I believe in different possibilities. My dad's a hardcore skeptic though, science loving. He grew up in a farm in the middle of Sweden's forests and is fairly familiar with Swedish wildlife. He said he's never seen anything like that before, or something that can move so fast. Now, we don't have many big mammals here too. The closest thing is really a deer, but it definitely wasn't that. So I don't know what it could have been. It's springtime in southern Utah or Colorado, near the Arches National Park around 1999. I was travelling with my family and I was about 6 years old. We'd been driving for a while after a full day of hiking. We arrived at a gas station with a picnic table on the left side of the building. We just bought bread, sliced meat and chips for dinner. The 7-Eleven special my family and father called it. After we ate, my parents went to chart our routes in the car. Me, my sister and brother sat at the table finishing our meals when a young Native American boy approaches. He's probably about 13 or so, but we can't really tell. It's dark and he seems to come out of nowhere. He greeted us and then says, "Can he sit with us?" We said, "Yeah, sure." That's when he said if we've heard of skinwalkers. The name itself is disconcerting. He describes them to us. They look like you and change shapes and are animals or people sometimes, but if you let them close, they'll get you. I was the youngest of the three, so I was usually the butt of the joke, but I could see the fear in my brother's eyes and sisters, and that scared me. The boy then left and just seemed to disappear. We told our parents about this, and they say he's scaring us, but my father says it's a real myth, and that there are skinwalkers, but he's not sure. Apparently the Navajo were also tricksters, he said, and there were witches there and they would change form. Apparently they usually appear as animals or people, but it could be aliens. Now we did believe in aliens. It was spooky, but we moved on. This is where it gets weird. The next day as we were driving, there was a car stopped in front of us. They were stopped for a deer standing in the middle of the road. We all got out and just looked at the deer, just standing there. I pulled up my camera and took a photo, but I looked through the lens and nothing is there, just the road. I looked back, the deer's there blinking and flapping its ears. I could hear its breath, but I looked through the camera and it was gone. Impossible, I thought. I'm an adult now and I'll never forget seeing that. A couple of years ago, I was in the woods in KY hiking and looking for some ginseng. I stopped to search the ground and saw a small stone rolling past me. I look up and saw another one land about 6 feet away. At first I'm thinking nothing of it, just curious to figure out what's going on. I move up on about 100 feet. Now, a small stone landslides beside me. I start looking around and then all of a sudden, it was just raining down small stones around me. By small I mean like pebbles. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I get a terrible feeling like I'm in danger. Immediately I started heading down off the mountain while loads of rocks are falling around me. I keep thinking I'm seeing shadows or something moving quickly between the trees, but never actually saw whatever it was. I have to add that I was on my own private property and nobody's around for literally miles and miles. It's a very secluded area and none of the rocks actually hit me. This is the first time sharing this and I've never told anybody about it before. I had quite a number of odd encounters over the years, lots of which came from my time camping as I was working towards Eagle Scout. I spent extensive amounts of time in national parks and in bushes solo. These are places I generally feel pretty comfortable in, but some of the experiences that I had creeped me out so much that it actually deters me from doing solo ventures. I'm still an avid outdoorsman, but I'm also very cautious. This particular event occurred in 2007 in the Gila Wilderness in the Gila National Park in New Mexico. Now I'm actually from New Mexico and was raised in Roswell, so this is an area that I visited several times prior without major incident. On this particular trip, I was with a group of about 10 or so other people. There were 2 days into our trek that several more actually went. For those who aren't familiar with Gila, it's a stunningly beautiful area with trails that follow a winding river that caverns beautifully through a canyon. There are high cliffs just on either side going up a few hundred feet through some parts of the canyon and also dense brush. Overall it does actually feel very isolated and has an odd vibe to it in certain places. I've always associated that with the fact that it's in an area with ancient Native American history dating back to at least 9600 BC that I know of, or maybe further. Lots of crazy stuff happened there over the years. Sure, it's got a compelling history. Now on this particular night, we were camped in an area where the river makes a U-shape as it wraps through the canyon. It was a fun day, and I'd even managed to catch some trout that I ate for dinner. Right around dusk, I needed to relieve myself, so I wandered away from our camp into what I described as a ravine. It's an arroyo where floodwaters drain into the river. There was dense brush and high slopes on either side. All in all, it seems to be a good place to go at the time. I made my way up the ravine, and thinking back on it, I walked an unreasonable distance from the camp, which I find strange. If I kept walking, it was almost as though I was doing so being drawn in further, which isn't my norm. Kind of absent-mindedly. As a preface, there is something I think many here are familiar with, colloquially known as the silence. Typically such things occur when a large predator is in the area, and I know from reading other stories that a lot of people understand this. Anyway, about halfway through dropping into the wilderness, I noticed it's very quiet. I knew something was very wrong. When I say quiet, I mean the silence was deafening, if that makes sense. By this time, it's nearly completely dark. I'm out of earshot, and alarm bells are going off intensely. Now my hair stood on end. I noticed a strange change in my perception, likely caused by the twilight phase change, but the light around me seems to become shrouded in a shadow, and it's very weird. It just becomes quiet. It was like you would hear yourself breathe. Now, you know that feeling you get when you're sitting somewhere public and just feel someone staring at you? That happened so intensely, and a few moments later, I hear a loud and distinct crack sound, an odd rustling about 30 feet away. This is quite far above me and actually in the bush. It sounded like somebody walking where nobody should be. It sounded like human footsteps cracking twigs. I'm petrified to make a move. But I finished my business and stood as confidently as I can, mustering to be able to face the direction of the sound. I'm unarmed. Knowing that there are predators, I didn't want to make myself appear vulnerable. Now, not in the dark especially. Now, I've encountered bears, mountain lions, but this felt so different. I didn't have the high ground. Now I say very loudly, hello. A few seconds go by and the rustling continues, followed with silence. With no responses back for a few moments, at this point, I felt beyond vulnerable and terrified. Unreasonably terrified, actually. Now in hindsight, after researching, I often wondered what this could have been. With the hair standing on the back of my neck up now, I noticed eyes. About 20 feet above the bank of the ditch is a pair of eyes staring at me. I was in shock for a moment as it was near where I heard the crack. Now slightly iridescent looking eyes high above me on the bank. It was high enough that it would have easily been a massive creature, and the eyes were far enough apart that you knew for a fact that this was quite a big thing. So the silhouette doesn't make sense. Instinctively I begin to back up as slowly as I can as I watch those eyes. That's when I hear another crack above me to my right and I lose it. This noise is much louder. At this point, my fight or flight does go into overdrive and I run. Breathless, I made it back to my camp and told my friends that I thought there was a large predator there and that we have to move, or at least put things in a bear bag. It could have been a bear or mountain lion, but who knows? I seem to have been in similar situations before with animals, but this was a lot different from that, so I don't know what it could have been. I was on shift one night and everything was going relatively normally. In fact, I did something against the protocol of where I worked. I decided that I needed to go for a walk just to get out. This is on the week of which is leading up to Halloween, so a lot of the trees are dead around here, and I kind of dealt with a few people being idiots earlier in the week. You'd often find people trying to scare each other out here, and I don't know, there was something really creepy about seeing people out here sometimes. As a ranger, it's something that shouldn't necessarily come as a surprise to me, as basically our whole job is just to watch out for people and make sure we maintain the nature and the park. There was a few things on my mind in this moment. I was getting really tired of working. I wasn't able to stop working when I wanted to, and my work didn't let me use time off when I wanted to, and I think it was having a little bit of an effect on me. I mean, I was kind of doing everything and doing a pretty good job of sticking to the book and getting everything done, but eventually it starts to tire you out a little bit. I realised too that if there was something on my mind, I would almost zone out completely and simply focus on that. Even if I was talking to somebody, I'd be looking them dead in the face and I'd just completely blank out to almost another place, which I think was pretty weird for me. But the show goes on, as the old saying goes, so I continue. As I'm walking, there was an absolutely beautiful brisk breeze this night and it made me feel really good. The trees are starting to look especially beautiful too, just because of the time of year. These didn't necessarily change colour too much, but there was something about having a mixture of ones with leaves on it and those without, or fern or whatever, that I found particularly attractive. The park lake where we were had a beautiful blue lake next to it. Now this meant that we had to be especially careful because sometimes people would go in the water, even at this time of the year when specifically they were instructed not to, they would still do it, and it become quite dangerous really, because all it takes is one wrong move and you can go in there for too long and not come out again. Hypothermia sets in a lot quicker than what people realise it does, so this is a specifically dangerous area, and I don't have a good feeling about being here for some reason. I can see that there's one small boat out there, but it's kind of drifting. I presume that somebody's left it there and forgotten about it, and it's just come off of the shoreline into the lake itself. I know for a fact that I'm absolutely not going to be able to get it right now. I don't want to take the boat out, and it's too dangerous because if I fall in, I'm really going to struggle to get myself back in time. I'd make a fire, yeah, but I don't want to set fire to the whole forest. One of our colleagues actually did this before, believe it or not. Rather than actually checking what they were doing was accurate and safe, they had in fact not done so whatsoever, and eventually ended up putting everybody's lives in danger here, which I think was a pretty crazy thing to do. We put out the fire quite quickly, but it could have easily spread into a huge one. It would have cost millions and millions of dollars for us to repair, but the toll on nature would have been far worse. So that wasn't necessarily my idea. I decided to call around to see if anybody else is there and try and figure out what everybody else is doing, but I don't get a reply, so I just assume that this might be empty. It might be my chance here. Now, I continue on and keep on getting more and more lost in my thoughts. It was kind of like a self-filling cycle where the more you do it, the worse it becomes, but it was really difficult for me to focus on anything else. I was actually quite annoyed. I just couldn't seem to get out of my head at all. It felt like I just had far too much work to do, and just people really making my life difficult. Also, there was some money I was owed on some online work I'd done, so I was pretty cheesed off about this. I mean, who isn't when they're owed money? So I continue onwards, and I can hear the breathing of animals around me. I don't know what animal that is, but I did realise that was a very strange thing to have. It's something that I haven't necessarily encountered. It sounded like there was maybe a dog breathing around me every so often, but it was weird. I thought maybe a dog got off or something, but God, I hated the idea of it. I love dogs and didn't want to know any were astray. I even stupidly start thinking maybe it's to do with the boat, and I keep trying to snap myself out of these weird spiraling thoughts but I just can't seem to. It was like something took control of my mind. That's when I noticed something on the horizon. There are 3 plumes of smoke. I think, God, that's the last thing I want. The problem is, I'm on the opposite side of the lake at this point. Funnily enough, the boat seems to be drifting towards me. I know I promised to myself that I wasn't going to go out on it, but I just wasn't in the mood. I think I was just too tired, so I waited. From the looks of it, this isn't necessarily a dangerous fire. It's almost like somebody was putting up a smoke signal, which I think is really weird. Why would you be putting up a smoke signal here? This is not hundreds of years ago. We are well within the 20th century now, so what was happening? I do find it particularly odd though how that the boat is slowly drifting across to literally exactly where I am. I sarcastically say thank you when I realise it's not too far away. Now the boat itself actually looks quite old. It's like somebody's made this out of hand, maybe 10 years ago or so, where there's almost some kind of agent or patina as such on the wood. It looks like nobody's ever been in it. I put my hand towards it and I stop. I have a feeling I shouldn't be doing this. God, what am I thinking? The boat could easily sink and then I'm in trouble. So I get up and continue now on the perimeter. The other problem now is I can't be gone from the station for too long because, really, I should be checking in with other people to let me know if there's anything that I need to do and how I am too. But I didn't. So, instead, I just keep walking quicker. Now, I'm getting closer to where the fire is, or at least the smoke, and I realise that it seems to have gone out. Out of the 3 plumes, I can only see 2 now. I get closer and there's only 1, and eventually none at all. I'm certain there's people doing this now. I think they've seen me and put out their fires and went to hide off somewhere else, so I don't take too much notice now. Just continue walking down there. Now I get closer and closer, and then I find something especially strange. There seems to be no source of the smoke or fire whatsoever, which is pretty weird. I don't understand that. I was literally right next to it and now there seems to be nothing. I should at least have some signs of what this is, but I don't. I decide that we're going to have to send out a search at some point, because this is really dangerous. I don't want to be the one sleeping there when there's a huge fire. So I decide to turn away. I look for the boat and I presume that it's drifted off somewhere further, as I start making my way around the other side again. I thought maybe some people had some time off over the Halloween holidays and just wanted to enjoy themselves out here. I call out, hey, no camping. When I lock eyes with something, there seems to be an owl or something up in the trees. It doesn't look right though. This looks like an absolutely huge one. I can make out the beak and where the eyes are supposed to be. And now I hear rattling. I quickly look around to see if there's any snakes or anything, but I don't see any. That's bizarre. It sounded like there was a rattlesnake right next to me. I'm actually terrified of the things. There shouldn't be any out here, but I quickly turn back. Not that I wasn't brave enough to investigate what was possibly going on here. I mean, I absolutely wasn't, but I don't want to get caught up in some kind of rubbish like that. So I get back. I've actually got bit by a snake before and had to go hospital, and it was not a fun experience or one that I'd like to do again in the future. I start to sweat a little bit too, and something feels off. As I'm walking, I can hear some kind of whistle sound. It sounds almost like a human whistling to try and retrieve an animal, but every so often. I don't know where it's coming from too. At one point it sounded like it was coming from right next to my head, and at other times it sounds like it's much further away. But the sound was definitely following me. I catch my thoughts spiraling once again into I'm gonna get murdered out here and some rubbish like that, so I manage to snap myself out of it. I walk a bit further, then take a few seconds to take in the beautiful scenery around me. It looks really nice, and I find that this calms me down a lot. I start focusing on the little things that I'm gonna do when I get back home, and again, I feel better now. As I was walking back, I couldn't stop thinking about how much time I felt like I'd wasted. I just felt like it was stupid to go out here. I was angry now because I decided to walk but actually felt worse for it. But I don't have too much time to dwell on it, and I'll eventually make it back in. I then hand over for the shift in the following morning. I don't mention anything to them, but the weird part's when I get home. Now, as I said, we're in the run up to Halloween, so you're kind of used to seeing different people dressed up and stuff. So I don't think much of what I see next. As I'm driving, something walks out into the road. Now, I'm on quite a long forest road here. I'm effectively in the middle of nowhere specifically, but you do get the odd car or two. What I see is something walk out which is about 4.5 feet tall. It comes from the tree line, holds something up to me, then walks off, and I can see a smoke trail behind it. I then realise it's holding some kind of sage or something. Again, I think this is especially weird, but remind myself it's Halloween, so I don't think too much of it. I eventually get back home, unlock up and go inside my home. I didn't have my family there at the time, so it was a little bit lonelier than normal. That was fine. I'm used to these situations happening, but it wasn't necessarily fun. I grab a newspaper, make myself a decaf coffee and sit down to drink it. On my porch I get a really nice view into the woods. Now, as I'm sitting there drinking it, I have a strange smell. It's one that I haven't smelt for years and years, since I was about 14 doing my first job. The person who worked there had the little tiny incense things. I don't know what you call them, but the things on the stick you light. This smelled just like that. I actually go and check my toaster and everything just to make sure there's not a big fire which is about to engulf my house, so I'm not bothering to check. But there's nothing. I then light a candle to try and put out the smell. And I sit down going to read my newspaper, and I start hearing the rattling sound once more. Okay, now this is quite scary. I'm actually worried myself, and I'm sure I can hear breathing. I go and grab my knife. I didn't have a gun at this time. I didn't want to get into a melee battle with something, but I think there's someone on my property. Or a snake, which I'm also going to have to probably fight off. My hands are actually really sweaty. It's annoying because I have to keep wiping them trying to hold my knife, and I actually put it into the sleeve of my jumper. As I'm doing this, I notice someone walking past my house kind of staring in too. They looked especially weird. It's someone with a very long beard who kind of stops for a few seconds and keeps on walking. There was something about it I didn't like. He looks very old. He has quite dark skin. But as soon as he goes past, the rattling sound seems to stop. Now, I don't know what to make of this again. And I decide to call the police now. Something was really off about this situation, and I couldn't necessarily put my finger on why it was all happening. So I wait for the cops to show up, which was late as anything. I'm actually tempted to call them to come back the following day because I can't be bothered, but eventually they arrive. I remembered looking at my watch and realising that the time had stopped on it, which is also bizarre. I just got this one. The cops come up and they're like, yeah, it's just, it's Halloween, man, it's just people playing around. I then go to explain what my profession is and the fact that I'm very used to dealing with weird situations like this, but They just kind of slide it off as in, oh no, don't worry man, just long hours, I get the same thing. I ended up inviting them in to have some coffee. It's just because I wanted some company really, but I do think this is especially strange. I say that no, something's wrong. I think someone's following me. And did you see the guy out here? He says no. He says that he's going to have a loop round before he gets back. We say our goodbyes and off he went. But I decide to look out the window. And what do you know? He does one turn to the right and goes off. Great, he hasn't done it. That doesn't mean I can't do it myself though. I have my flashlight and I go outside holding the knife. I'm kind of holding it in a way where I'm seeing in front of myself I can kind of punch out with it. It's probably really not a good idea because I'm pretty stupid and clumsy with these things, but it felt like the right thing to do. Now I have a good look round and I do notice something especially weird. I can hear my name being called from one other side of the forest. Of course it's on the side that has no lights and that I can't see into. It sounds like somebody very slowly saying Will. Will. At first I think maybe it's a wind, but I'm not sure. Then I think I hear somebody saying help me, and then my name. I think that I just need a good night's sleep. I shine my torch into the forest and I can't see anything. I turned it off for a little bit just to try and get a better view of things with my night eyes, but I can't see a thing. So I go back. I say, man, I've got to get out of this. I'll need a good night's sleep and a rest. Then I angrily check my emails, and once again they haven't approved my time off, which is getting ridiculous now. You'd think in a job like this they'd actually value you getting a good night's sleep and your well-being, but no, not at all. They absolutely do not care here, it turns out, but that's a battle for another time. So I call in for the night and wake up and start driving to my work for the next day. Now I'm driving on that road again and I stop for a little while. I look around trying to see where the person could have come or went to, but again I can't see anybody. I think once more that this is bizarre. There must have been somewhere that they went. There's no way that they could appear in the road like that then just vanish literally into nowhere. I know this is especially weird because why on earth would anybody be out here and just stop like that? Obviously they were trying to scare me, but why? That's the part that's bothering me. I get in my car again, turn on the engine, and for a fraction of a second, I can see something. It's sat in the backseat of my car staring at me. I turn around very quickly. Now this all literally happens in probably a few milliseconds, and it's gone. Whatever that thing is, it's almost just vanished as though it wasn't there. I just can't figure out what's going on. It was like somebody was sat in my car, but I wish I could give you more details, but I was so scared that I was hardly able to bring myself to look back. This all happened so quickly. I don't know what it is. I drive and shake my head, watching as my mile counter ticks over. I try and break it down and think, well, every mile that I go I'm getting closer to my time off. But I didn't think it would have this kind of effect on me. Never had it before. As I'm driving too, I notice something else up ahead. I see more figures dressed in black. I slam on the brakes and my hands are shaky. They then turn and I realise that they're young children in Halloween outfits. And I snap myself out of it. I say, come on, get a grip. Get a hold of yourself. You're a ranger. It's Halloween. Just relax. I'm actually annoyed at how shaken up I become from this, and I start to become a bit more fearless. I mean, it was a beautiful time of year. Actually one of my favourites, to be honest. Now I make it back in, and I say hey to everyone. That's when one of them looks at me, and they appear almost white. I say, hey, what's wrong? He says, I heard something, man, last night. I say, what did you hear? He says, well, I heard somebody calling my name, and it sounded like you. I say, that's impossible, I was at home. He says, I know. I don't think the other guys are gonna believe me on this one, but it's like you were injured out there trying to call out for help. I say that I heard something too, and so I thought I heard my name being called last night. I tell him I can't be sure because how quiet it was, but I definitely heard it. He then tells me be careful out there, and slaps me on my shoulder, and hands me some jade. I say, what's this? He said that it's from his family and it keeps you safe in times of danger. I say thank you and say that I'm gonna return it to him as soon as I get the chance. So I turn back around and get ready for my shift. I'm not feeling good though at all. Now, I know something's way off here. But again, I've got my job to do, and it's not a fun one. I'm gonna have to go around to where I did before. And then suddenly realise that I completely forgot to mention about the boat on the lake. I'm actually worried a bit because we do need to report these things and it could be a big danger for others. I'm not so afraid though when I realise that one of my colleagues is actually about to do the patrols with me. I calm down quite a lot and we both head out there. This is someone who's been doing the job for not too long, but they're very confident, which is probably what I needed. We start talking about all kinds of things and he says that his kids love Halloween and how they've been making pumpkin cakes and lattes. After not too long I actually completely forget about my fear and I'm feeling happy really. I was actually going to get some Halloween style cakes later on and I was excited for that. We actually live near a store where that you can get really good Halloween gear. And I always get something, even if it's just small, kind of like for a treat for myself. So I'm feeling okay now. As we head out though, I realise that my colleague keeps on looking over his shoulder. I say what's wrong and he says, nothing. I just keep thinking that I can see something. I ask him to elaborate, but he can never give me much details. He then says it's almost like somebody or something is just staring at me. But he can never explain exactly why or how. So I think, okay, that's weird. But I don't know. I can't explain it. So he says, don't worry man, let's just keep going. And his tone suddenly changes. I say, hey bud, what's that? He then says to me, what do you mean? I say, what's that up there? Is that another person? And I lock eyes with something very tall slowly going behind a tree. I can only describe it as kind of looking like a tall figure but with an animal's head. I can barely see it through the tree line. I didn't have my far sight glasses on at this point, but my buddy saw it too. He tells me to get back. He says I don't know what that thing is, but we're not going up there. I agree. We think maybe somebody's put something up for Halloween, or jettisoned some gear for it, but it just seems so unlikely. And I'm tired of using it as an excuse to rationalise all these strange things happening. So we start walking back quickly. Now we're both quite worried at this point. Luckily he had some time in the military so he could keep up an insane pace. But it almost felt like no matter how far that we actually walked, we didn't necessarily make progress. I think it's kind of like, you know, when you have a terrible, terrible dream and your body doesn't work properly if there's danger. It's basically exactly like that. So all we can do now is just keep trying to progress at the best pace possible. Now, it doesn't take too long before we get back. And we decide that we're not going to go out there for a while. Luckily we do have cameras covering quite a lot of this place. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, the cameras didn't actually cover the area that we went to. I mean, this place is huge and you couldn't expect it to, but it was annoying. But it was almost like this thing knew how to stay out of sight, whatever it is. So yeah, we're both pretty freaked out now. And I can't stop scanning the cameras. I actually scared myself a couple of times where that I think my brain was trying to fill in the gaps or something and nothing was there. But that's okay. I feel a lot safer doing it behind a screen. Now, as night falls, I'm unfortunately the good old guy that has to stay there. It's now leading closer and closer to Halloween though, so at least I have some scary movies to watch. I know that's not a good idea, to be honest, and I don't actually know specifically why I decided to do that, but it's almost like a routine for me. So I now say goodbye to the other colleague as he goes home, back to the bunker and safety of his house. I'm here in this wooden building which probably wouldn't hold back anything, let alone a monster that might be out there. But I put on a Halloween film and I start to relax. I really like to watch some of the classics and I decide to watch Frankenstein. I feel pretty good and I actually have the song quite loud. I can in fact still hear the radio if I need to, so there's nothing to worry about. I do hear a knocking on the window though. I think, oh, they've come to relieve me. I get up and I can't see anyone there. I quickly have a scan round on the cameras and I notice I can't see any cars or anything. Not to worry. I now begin to open the door, but I realise nobody's out here. I think maybe it's just on the TV, so I go and turn the volume down and just start laying there. I'm leaning back in my seat, just kind of thinking about my life now and everything related to it. And that's when I hear it again. This time it made me jump. Now I can't be certain about this next part because I was kind of in a daze, but I'm sure for a second I saw a face in the window. Impossible, I think. And ended up sleeping for a while. Now I don't actually tell anybody that I did this at work because you're really not supposed to. But I think I was just exhausted and drained from it all. I wake up at sunrise and to Halloween, and I feel alright about things. Now, I go and say goodbye to some of my colleagues who have now arrived. They say, did anything weird happen? And I say, no, it was pretty cool. Just the usual. I'm not actually sure why I did this. It probably would have been a good idea for me to tell them that, yeah, there's something crazy going on out there. You've got to really watch yourselves, but I didn't. So, I decide just to go back home. I get in my car and I feel pretty good. I drive to a gas station which has a cafe and I go to get a pumpkin spice latte, which again is something I love to have during Halloween times. There's all kinds of trick-or-treaters out too. They do it quite early in my state, so I think this is really cool. I don't know why, there's almost like a magic to it for me. I'm feeling pretty good but very sleep deprived. I'm also a bit annoyed because I probably threw off my entire sleeping pattern now from doing that. But it's okay. So I eventually get back home. My brother's actually here now with his partner, which is pretty cool. They actually live quite a far away from here, but they pass through when they're going to college. And it's always nice to say hey to them and see how they're doing with their lives. So I'm here for a little bit with them. We decide to continue. Now we keep on watching some scary films and we go out together for a walk. We go quite a long way and actually come to some of the other houses. You can see all kinds of different people doing trick-or-treating and whatnot. And eventually we decide to head back. My brother says, oh god, well, do you see that costume? It was one really good one. They look like they might be older on stilts or something, but someone had something really tall dressed up. I say, what do you mean? He says, don't know man, it kind of, they went into the woods, but it looked cool. I didn't ask much more about it. The tone of my brother's voice wasn't a need to raise any kind of fear at the time, so I don't. But I start to feel sick though. Now it's kind of like the feeling as if you got some kind of like unclean surfaces around you, and you kind of have like the lump in your throat, like you're struggling to hold things down. So we eventually get back now, and life's pretty good. We're happily watching things, and I ended up falling asleep on the chair, and my brother and his girlfriend go to the spare room. I'm awoken in the night by something knocking on the door. I grab my bowl of candy and say hey, very deliriously, opening the door. I wait for a few seconds and wipe my eyes. I expected to feel the weight drop from the candy bowl as some happy trick-or-treaters fill their eyes with the candy and later their stomachs. But this doesn't happen. I look around again, and I think this is weird. There's no one here. Maybe I've imagined it. So I close the door behind me, turn around and go to sit down. After doing so, it happens again, this time loud enough to actually make me jump. I quickly get up now and decide that I need to investigate this. There was definitely something off with the way that this happened. It was too loud and hostile to be anything normal. I start to think, well, maybe it's my brother. I go to look where they're staying, but I can't see anyone. So I know that that's bizarre. As I get up, I then see my brother crouching down looking out a window. What's wrong, man? He says, did you hear that? I say, what? I swear I just heard my girlfriend and her name calling out from the woods. I even believed it myself. He said he got up to go to the bathroom when he heard it. He can hear this from the open, but he can't figure out exactly where it's coming from. He said he went to check and that's when he realised she's asleep, so he knows that something is definitely wrong here. And that's when his fear sets in. I say, what next? He says, well, I saw you, idiot. And then I think, this is really weird. I then say, did you hear the knocking? And he says no. How he didn't hear the knocking, I'll never know, because it felt like it could have shook the house down. We decide that it's the best time that we investigate. Now my brother says that he's going to check around out the windows, and I say that yeah, I'm going to go outside. I don't know why I actually agreed to this, because it meant my brother was in the safety of the house and I just went outside, but I guess it's my house and I know the area well, so I head outside to see what I could. I've got my flashlight on and some warm clothes now. I was actually so tired that I didn't think to bring a weapon, which I regretted. I thought I could probably turn off the torch and quickly hit someone on the head, but thinking of it now, that probably wouldn't have worked, but it helped me anyway. So I turn off the torch a few times to try and let my night eyes set in and not give away my position when I see something. Up ahead, I see the silhouette of something standing there. This thing is very tall and slender. Now, I only saw this for about 2 seconds as I turned and screamed, running in the opposite direction. I look over my shoulder and I can see it walking slowly towards me with a limp. I scream my brother's name and say, help, what the hell is that? I run in and slam the door. My brother starts screaming too, and subsequently his girlfriend as he spots it. Now we quickly lock all of the doors and windows, and I go and get some knives and give one to my brother. We think maybe it's possibly a trick-or-treater, but we realise quickly it's not, as it slowly goes towards the forest. This thing almost walks like it's on stilts or stick legs or something. It's like it was made out of dark drapes or something. It slowly goes towards the tree line. He says, that's it. I say, what, tell me, thinking he knows and he's going to have a rational explanation. He says, the thing, that's where it come from, the voice. My girlfriend. We then looked at each other really confused, and we stare and waited. 1 minute passes, then 2 minutes, then 3 minutes, then 4. And we realised that, well, we probably should have checked the other side. And now I look on the other side of the window. Furthermore, I'm terribly paranoid now. What was that thing? I just don't know. I actually have so much energy now that I don't feel tired whatsoever. I actually went to make my brother some coffee so that way we can actually stay awake. And figure out what on earth is happening. After a little bit of time, we realise that we're not necessarily in danger now, and that's a nice feeling. But it doesn't last for too long. We eventually decide that we need to go back and figure out what this thing is. So as soon as day breaks, we head out. Now we're not really able to see anything though. We have a look, eventually bravely going towards a tree line where we saw this thing, but there's nothing there. So that's actually really annoying. I wanted an explanation for this. Actually, all we saw was some trick-or-treaters getting it in the next day, which I thought was quite funny, but none of them actually come here. Now, me and my brother racked our brains for probably the next 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out what we've just seen, but neither of us are able to come up with any kind of logical or rational explanation as to what it could have possibly been. Whatever this is seems to go against everything normal or that we're aware of, but I don't like that it called out my brother's name and that I was hearing this before. Now I have the rest of the day off and my brother and his girlfriend offered me to go with them, but I say sorry, I can't, I've got my work soon. And dishearteningly, I decide that I have to just go in to work. I really don't want to. I would have paid $5,000 to not have to go in that day. It really felt like it. I actually didn't have that much saved, but I would have given it, honestly, or whatever I had in my bank account then. I get into work and I'm met by police there, which is very weird. I get a feeling in my stomach thinking, oh no, we've probably found a body or something, and I get a little paranoid. I then go and ask what happened, and one of my colleagues come and say, hey, did you hear what happened to Bill? I say, no, what happened? Oh god, how is he? He says, no, he's fine. He just broke his leg. I say, what do you mean? And he tells me that when he was on the night shift there, he heard somebody calling his name. He said that he couldn't figure out exactly who it was, but it kept saying that I need help up here. He said he followed it and followed it, but he was so caught up in this that he didn't actually take a second to look at his surroundings. And eventually, he made it over a ridgeline and felt something sharp in his back. I say, what? He says it felt like something stabbed him. He then feels a force push him down, and he falls a long way. He fell from his radio too, so we didn't know any of this was going on. I say, God, is he definitely alive? They say, yeah. And they eventually find him out there and hear him whimpering. When they found him, he's fractured his leg, and he's got all kinds of cuts, but 3 very distinct gashes in his back, which he had to stop bleeding. Eventually they're able to get the medics out there to support him and take him away, and now he's being treated for it at the local hospital. I say I can't do this, and I actually give in my working notice right then and there. They say they understand. They didn't ask me for any more details. I was able to leave, and it was just due to psychological shock is what they had on paper. I remember driving back to my home and not knowing what to make of all of this. I decided that the safest thing that I can do now is move back to my parents' house. Well, I actually ended up going to my grandma's, but I did that for 6 months before moving. Even when the house was for sale, I refused to live there. Even to this day, it still really gives me nightmares. Every Halloween it comes straight back to the front of my mind.